Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto and Sasuke escape the village to find their own path, fighting for their lives and gaining power for themselves. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The blonde sighed, slumping down heavily in his poor excuse for a chair situated in the kitchen of his dull, one-bedroom apartment. He sat idly scratching the back of his head while keeping his cerulean eyes closed, not quite ready to face the day. The blonde in his days, however, had decided on something. Today wasn't going to be like every other day. He had a lucky feeling that something important was going to happen. As he happily indulged in such thoughts, he absent-mindedly knocked over his early morning cereal. It only took milliseconds for his eyes to snap open and witness the disaster as the bowl clattered and landed on his lap. With a heavy sigh of defeat, he looked down at the remains of his breakfast that covered him as the bowl rolled away from the crime scene. Great, so much for being lucky. He huffed, clearly aggravated by the event. It was always easier to annoy him on a morning. As he moved to clean up, Naruto decided he wouldn't let it get the better of him. He was determined that today would be a good day in one way or another. Being a 7-year-old child, Naruto was still rather optimistic in his day-to-day life. No matter the hardships, everything would get better eventually. In fact, the boy didn't think they could get much worse, so things could only improve. He rolled his shoulders in circles, attempting to remove the dull ache from the excessive training that the Kyuubi tortured him with day in and day out. He was more than thankful for his tenant and personal tutor, but he had to admit the gain sure came with a lot of pain, not that he wasn't used to that. At first, the training was mostly educational, developing the boy's mind rather than his strength. He was an orphan after all, and there were a lot of things he didn't understand. Kyuubi helped to clear up some of the basics, then went on to teaching him at what the demon considered would be academy level, despite Naruto's claims that the kids from the academy were never pushed so hard. After a while, Naruto had begun to grasp tactics and strategy, though he didn't apply himself to studying all that much at first. He had shown that his battle intelligence was nothing to be mocked. In the end, the Kyuubi managed to get him into a routine of studying. To accomplish this, the great beast effectively had to exaggerate just how strong that studying such things would make him, even if it was partly true. Now he had started a hellish regime, being initially excited by the thought of learning a new technique. The blonde had been all too easy to win over for the fox. It was then that the Kyuubi had taught him one of the many forbidden techniques that the demon had witnessed. Though it was difficult to recall the seals for most of forbidden arts, this jutsu had but one hand seal. The Kage Bunshin no Jutsu worked well with Naruto's attributes after all. It would be foolish to not have him learn it, at least the Kyuubi thought so. Then it happened. Kyuubi told him of the Shadow Clone training program, and the gates of hell opened for the young blonde. He would spend hours working out, sparring and running laps to build his stamina, all of this being alongside his clone comrades, of course. The gains were high, but unfortunately so were the aches and pains. Thankfully, some of the stiffness soon subsided, leaving the blonde to laze comfortably on his couch, still not quite ready to begin his busy day. He sprawled out comfortably on the brown sofa. There's still plenty of time till I gotta set off. He mused with a grin while he made himself comfortable. It was strange, he thought, how as a 4-year-old, he was able to meet the giant demon that resided within him. He remembered his first encounter with Kyuubi vividly. After narrowly escaping a violent crowd of villagers who had chased him through the entirety of Konoha, he had managed to seal himself in his apartment. After making sure he was safe, the young blonde proceeded to pass out on the tired brown sofa that decorated his living room. It was then that he had woken up enveloped by darkness, causing him to reach out in order to feel for something he could use as a guide. The sound of dripping water that echoed around the place seemed to be coming from all directions, intimidating him nearly as much as the old, moss-covered sewer walls that he leant against. To his displeasure, he immediately soaked his feet as he trudged through the unpleasant water below him. He didn't know where he was and had no interest in staying long. Hello? A confused young voice asked, not expecting a reply. He looked around the eerie environment that he found himself in. He had no clue how he had managed to get here, when just a moment ago he was laid peacefully on his couch after escaping the villagers. Is anyone here? He called out again in mild confusion. By now he was beginning to sweat nervously, the feeling of desperation suddenly washing over him. His eyes widened in alarm as he heard a terrifying grumble. Whatever made that sound must have been huge, and Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to investigate what it was. Am I dead? He thought to himself, now too afraid to speak aloud. Come here, boy. A booming voice ordered, causing Naruto to shudder as he realized that, whatever it was addressing him. Naruto glared down at his feet as they took one step after another against his will. He had no idea what he was doing. Cold sweat raced down his cheeks as he realized he was no longer in control. Stop. If I go there, I'll really die. He pleaded in his head, only hoping that his body would listen to him. To the blonde's relief, he stopped. In confusion, he slowly looked up as the presence he felt caused shivers to run down his spine. His eyes slowly took in the enormous golden bars in front of him, causing him to gulp. To Naruto they looked impenetrable, that is until he saw the thing they were imprisoning. HMPH. To be contained in something so small, I should be offended. The Kyuubi spoke calmly, though to young Naruto it seemed as if the great beast was bellowing as the sounds echoed around the room at a deafening volume. Why am I here? Naruto questioned bravely, hoping that the bars would at least stop the colossal beast from killing him on the spot. It would appear you've lost consciousness. The giant nine-tailed fox stated while swishing its tails in a bored manner, leaning closer to the bars. The great kitsune studied the small infant. Do you realize who I am? I am the Kyuubi, a powerful demon that once threatened to destroy your home. Do you not fear me? The beast asked the young blonde that had entered her holding cell. Destroy my home? Why? Why did you want to destroy Konoha? Naruto replied, a little confused by the demon's questions. To his surprise the Kyuubi seemed to be in thought for a moment before answering. Do you not care that I destroyed most of your village? It taunted, causing the blonde to scratch his head in attempt to help him think. Well, why did you want to attack Konoha? Did they try to hurt you or something? They try to hurt me sometimes. Naruto answered innocently. Kyuubi closed its eyes, as if processing the blonde's answer. It wasn't what the great beast had been expecting to say the least. The fox growled in mild defeat, the sound echoing around its prison and throughout the sewers. Naruto looked up at the huge monster-like creature, slightly less afraid than before as it began to speak. I had no intentions of attacking this place, kid. A man with those damn cursed eyes cast a genjutsu upon me, Madara-cha. Kyuubi spoke with its eyes closed, as if regretting its actions that fateful night. To the beast's surprise, a humming noise resounded throughout her cell. But doesn't that mean that it wasn't your fault? Naruto wondered aloud. The nine tails opened its eyes slowly to look at the boy, now interested in him due to his way of thinking. A feral grin spread across its features. It doesn't matter whose fault it was. It happened. Now I'm in here till the day you die. Kyuubi retorted, then let out a hollow chuckle that boomed around the sewers, frightening the young blonde somewhat. Why, you said that this is inside of me, right? The blonde asked with a slight amount of disbelief while looking around the place, then continued, does it have to look so depressing? Naruto asked, rubbing his neck nervously. Inside his mind sure wasn't a nice place to be, or so he thought. I guess you probably don't like it in here, huh? He asked, not quite sure where he was going with this. Yes, this is in your mind, you can make it appear however you want it to. Look around you, kid. Of course I don't like it in here, it's an oversized kennel stuck in a sewer. The Kyuubi raged at the seemingly idiotic question, letting out a heavy-hearted sigh at the thought of residing in such a place for the rest of its days. And then like this? Naruto thought aloud as he closed his eyes tight, as if trying to picture something. As he did, the sewer walls began to dissolve, fading into nothing. Luscious green grass grew from the water below. Trees reached up from the ground to the heavenly blue sky that was decorated with fluffy white clouds, and the glistening sun shone down on the new forest clearing that was filled with sound of wildlife. It seemed that not all of the water had disappeared, as a crystal clear lake could be seen in the distance. Naruto opened his eyes and immediately laughed happily with the results. This is just like the place that old man Hokage took me for a picnic. He bellowed happily. To the Kyuubi's horror, the great demon seemed to be shrinking in size. The cage ceiling it had vanished from view, and now the fox was now only around 8 feet tall. What is this? Kyuubi asked, wiggling its paw angrily, but the new golden bracelet around it refused to shake loose. This is the seal? It asked rhetorically, then began looking around at its new surroundings. Even for a 1,000-year-old beast, it was impressed by the sudden change of scenery. You did this for me? The nine tails questioned, somewhat confused to the boy's motives. The young blonde laughed nervously, showing a foxy grin to the great beast before speaking. Well, we live together, so maybe we could be friends. He let out another nervous laugh until he saw the now much smaller fox's tail swishing around happily. Friends? You want to be friends with me? The fox asked incredulously, looking at the small boy. To the Kyuubi's surprise, she was soon engulfed in a hug from the small boy, who was now laughing and giggling happily for a reason that was unknown to the great demon. Why yes, well, there's a good human. Kyuubi wrapped up the boy in one of its tails, effectively returning the hug as it recovered from the somewhat embarrassing moment. To her surprise, the boy just snuggled against the tail wrapped around him. When I grow up I want to be the Hokage. Oi. Kyuubi. You must be really strong, right? You must know something about ninjas. Naruto shouted with enthusiasm, leaving the Kyuubi pondering something. Well, as it were, I was in fact sealed inside of a human woman. She reached a high rank as a ninja. Besides, who do you think I am? I once knew the sage of 6 paths, you know. The Kyuubi declared with a certain amount of pride clear in her voice. What? That's awesome. You have to help me get strong. Naruto pleaded while wrapping the fox up in an even tighter hug. I shall do my best, kid. Kyuubi replied seriously, feeling a sense of duty. Almost no one has graced me with kindness in so many years after all. Kyuubi thought to herself. What's a kit? My name is Naruto, the young blonde asked, confused by the nickname. The Kyuubi just giggled in response to his innocent behavior. A kid is a fox cub. The great beast thought, causing Naruto to hum in thought. Does that mean you'd be like a fox, mom? He asked, laughing to himself as he did. I suppose it would, yes. She answered, letting out a small chuckle of her own. It's decided, I shall make you the strongest ninja possible. My container shall be feared throughout the land as a powerful force to be reckoned with. Kyuubi declared to the young boy that was currently snuggled against her. Thanks to his reminiscing, time had unfortunately escaped the blonde's attention, like most mornings, leaving Naruto hurriedly pulling on his black high-collared jacket. Its burnt orange trim was the only eye-catching feature other than the silver zip that ran down the center of the jacket. Hidden underneath the jacket was a loosely fitting white tank top, decorated with the Uzumaki clan swirl insignia, proudly displayed in black on the center of the shirt. Matching his jacket, he wore black, combat standard pants that missed the burnt orange trim. The combat pants had bandages wrapped neatly around Naruto's left thigh, used for his weapons pouch, which he had just recently stocked with kunai and shuriken. After wearing the combat pants for a few days, he found that the loose material was hindering his movements somewhat, causing him to tie the bottom of them with bandages. To complete his outfit, he had decided on the standard black ninja sandals, along with a black headband, which would eventually be replaced by his hit I-8. With one final look around the small one-bedroom apartment, he nodded his head, satisfied that he hadn't forgotten anything. Unable to resist, he stretched his arms up high into the air, letting out a yawn that filled silence of the apartment for a brief few seconds. Now relieved of the lingering fatigue, he headed out of his apartment, ready to face the day. Well, he considered himself to be ready at least. The Raven slammed the door shut while letting out a low growl of frustration, a deep frown dressing his face. He felt the need to vent further, shouting into the empty hallway to do so. Everyone's the same around here. Annoying. HMPH. The obviously irritated Uchiha complained as he huffed towards his living room, the huge empty building feeling somewhat lonely now that the other members had all been heartlessly murdered. Just a few months ago the Proud Clan's living areas would be buzzing with life, now they were desolate like a ghost town, which was essentially what the Uchiha compound could now be considered. He continued through the living room, the white couch not tempting him even the slightest bit. The sound of his footsteps on the wooden flooring continued to echo throughout the house as he passed through the door leading to the staircase. Leaving the Uchiha symbol wall display behind, he made his way upstairs. The Raven knew he should have waited until his 8th birthday, as instructed by his parents when they were still alive, but considered that by now it was close enough. He needed to train and his now tightly fitting clothing was holding him back from doing so. Sasuke now more than ever felt the need to be stronger, he had a purpose, he had to get revenge for his clan. Before he had simply felt the need to be noticed, to be someone other than just Itachi's little brother, and had trained himself to be able to show the world just how strong he really was. Initially he was going to be trained by his father at a later age, he was to be brushed aside until Itachi had finished his training, though in secrecy, he began to take from the clan's library, studying whatever he could get his hands on, anything that would give him an edge over the other academy students when he attended. Sasuke was intelligent and had shown almost immediately, complex battle tactics and theories about physical fitness and training schemes came naturally to him, leading him to even create a training regime of his own. He had worked tirelessly both mentally and physically in order to stand out from his brother even a little, but in comparison to the elder Uchiha, who had been thrown into war at a young age and forced to adapt, he was just a sheltered child. Ever since the night of the Uchiha massacre, Sasuke had begun pushing himself further than ever before, sometimes even passing out from chakra exhaustion as he attempted to master his family's signature Kaiten jutsu. Now though he was in desperate need of his new training gear, even though he was supposed to wait until his 8th birthday. Not like anyone can stop me anyway. The small Raven mused coldly while heading to the wardrobe situated in his parents' room. Passing the grand double bed, he noticed that it had been made with loving care that only his mother could seem to achieve. Sasuke shrugged off useless thoughts of his family, turning his attention eagerly to the large oak wardrobe in front of him, the wooden double doors, the only thing coming between him and his new training gear. Only feeling a sense of duty to listen to his deceased parents for a few more moments, he willed himself to pull open the large cupboard doors and reveal his training gear. He had important things to do today after all, and couldn't afford to hesitate. The Raven slowly pulled open the doors with a slight creak, excited to see his new clothing. To his surprise he heard a soft thud, seeing a rather large scroll rolling by his feet. Sasuke was intrigued, leaving him momentarily forgetting about his combat purpose training gear. Picking it up from the floor he noted that "Dear Sasuke" was all the scroll had written on it. Strange. Sasuke thought, he had not expected a scroll, perhaps it was a birthday message. Now interested in what it contained, he opened it. Sasuke began to read, his eyes widening in horror as he did. The scroll documented the truth of the clan slaughter. What shocked him most was that it had been written and predicted by his own father, right down to the time and date to the place he would meet his end, not missing a single detail. Everything was there, the truth about Itachi's orders, the plans for an uprising against Konoha, Shisui's death, Itachi's higher level of Sharingan, and lastly plans for a civil war that shown that the Uchiha were plotting to become leaders of the village. Reading on, despite his emotions, the scroll finally came to the end. The bottom of the document had been decorated by a seal, though in reality it was no decoration. Curious, Sasuke pushed chakra into it, revealing a small Uchiha crest that fell onto the palm of his hand. To the Raven's surprise, extra writing appeared on the scroll in place of the newly removed seal. There was a final message left by his father. Sasuke, this is the crest of the Uchiha. It is something that only I am able to hand down to the heir of the Uchiha. If you are capable, this crest will awaken your Sharingan. As he finished reading the unsealed section of the scroll that his father had written, he felt an unpleasant burn on the palm of his hand. He stared at the Uchiha crest in amazement as it dissolved away into his skin, causing him to bite back the sudden pain. Soon the pain was overwhelming, forcing Sasuke to close his eyes. As he did, he felt a surge of warm energy rushing to his eyes, and upon opening them, he could see things clearer than ever before as he glanced around the master bedroom, as if seeing for the first time. Trudging into the bathroom next door, Sasuke ignored the cold white floor tiles against his feet as he looked into the long horizontal mirror hung above the matching white ceramic sink. Seeing his new crimson eye color made him feel a strange wave of satisfaction wash over him. To the Raven it seemed more like he was a real Uchiha now, as he gazed at the one Tomo Sharingan looking back at him. Other than his eyes, Sasuke was a ghostly white, even paler than usual, since he had finished reading the unexpected document. He was living in some sort of crazy nightmare all over again. His own brother had been turned against him, and worst of all it was his own village who were to blame. Cold sweat raced down his face as he stared into the mirror, gripping the ceramic sink below him tightly in attempt to deny the truth of what he had just read. It couldn't be true, could it? Sasuke thought to himself. The massacre never had made sense to him. Itachi wasn't a cold-blooded killer that would simply murder his whole family just to test his strength at least. Sasuke didn't want to believe so. A strong case of paranoia formed in his head, forcing him to unconsciously glance out of the window, looking for anyone who may be watching him. The sudden feeling that everyone was against him began to overwhelm him. He couldn't help but feel completely trapped. Mostly though he was devastated from reading the contents of his father's scroll. He felt the crushing hurt of the loss of his clan all over again, and now had even become frightened of his own village. It now seemed that his survival was merely a loose end of a mission. They pretended he was some sort of prince, treating him like royalty, the precious last of the Uchiha. They want me dead just like the rest of my clan. Sasuke thought to himself, clenching his fists in anger. He looked around frantically to see if anyone had saw his previous action. If he acted any different they would know for sure that he had found out they were after him, and it would take more than just a new set of eyes to save him. More potent than any of the feelings the boy was going through was his anger. His rage flared as he relived the priceless moments with his brother. His brother that was forced to choose between stopping a war and killing his own family. He violently punched the wooden bathroom door, attempting to relieve some of his rage. The loud bang from the strike echoed through the empty house that only reminded him that the compound was empty. He gritted his teeth while pulling his arm free from the punctured sliding door, his paranoia coming back in force. I have to get the hell out of here. He raged inwardly to himself before shaking off the idea. He scanned the area with his now red eyes, cautiously looking for anyone who could be monitoring him. Those Anbu he had seen around the compound must be there for a reason. I won't get very far if I leave by myself. I need someone else. Anyone is better than nothing. He plotted. Taking a deep breath, Sasuke calmed himself, choosing to head downstairs in a stoic manner that made even his usual behavior look sociable as he attempted to act normal. It wasn't long before he found himself planning. Vivid scenarios would appear in his mind, starting with what he'd take with him on his journey. He had limited himself to a specific weight, any more than that, and he'd be weighed down when moving or in his case escaping this prison. Countless lists of options went through his head on just his equipment alone, ranging from the best chance to fend off an opponent to the least amount of weight, which would allow him to escape from a battle a lot easier. Sasuke began thinking that a way of treating injuries would be essential to his survival no matter what. If he couldn't treat his wounds or manage to stay alive, then all would be for nothing. Soon he had collected whatever he could find from the Uchiha compound and stored it in his original place of planning, the secret Uchiha hideout which had become the only place he felt safe right now. Sasuke glanced over at the goods he had gathered on the table, nodded to himself, and then started storing them into his backpack. The medicines such as painkillers, vitamins, soldier pills and bandages were the first items to be packed away, though he was not sure what would follow. The Uchiha looked back at the small wooden table in the center of the room. The two ancient candles that barely lit the room caused him to squint just to see the items he had gathered. In a burst of rage he knocked the remaining items off the table with a swipe of his arm. It's all useless. You're not thinking, Sasuke. Everything changes depending on who I leave with, damn it. Sasuke roared inwardly, with loud growl escaping him. He sighed heavily, pushing his hands through his hair. He felt pressured into getting this right. He'd only get one chance at this, from then on he'd be hunted down. He soon recognized the importance of having someone to rely on all over again. New plans and scenarios were easy to form, but before he could lose himself even further with pointless daydreams, he decided he needed to get out of the compound for a while. He would usually go down to the river around this time anyway. Giving in to his paranoia, decided he had better stick to his schedule. Naruto groaned tiredly as he forced himself to stand. The small cuts and bruising that were littering his body had already begun fading away as if they were never there, though his body was still aching from the pain. The blonde found that he really had to hold back today. After nearly snapping at the villagers who were attacking him, he barely resisted the urge to kill them. He really couldn't take it anymore. Every single day he grumbled with a heavy heart. Memories of the beatings he had received over the years got the better of him, leaving him rolling his shoulders, hoping to remove some of their newfound stiffness. Naruto didn't understand the villagers, but to him it was worse that they didn't give him a chance to understand. To them he was nothing more than a means to get revenge on the Kyuubi. I'm supposed to be one of them, to fight on the same team as them, so why does this always happen? He groaned, perfectly aware of his situation with the Kyuubi. The way he saw it was that the nine-tailed fox was forced into attacking the village. If it wasn't for him suppressing the beast, then there really would be a demon in Konoha, a real one, and not an innocent 7-year-old boy that didn't defend himself. He walked aimlessly around the village outskirts, trying desperately to distract his mind from the growing displeasure of life in Konoha. The only things he managed to look forward to was his time alone, sitting on top of the Hokage monument on the fourth's head, his father's head. I don't know how people can't tell they must really be stupid or just refuse to believe it. He vented to himself, exhausted from the day, his tired legs would barely lift themselves towards the destination that he didn't have. From the corner of his eye he saw a boy. He had pitch black hair and was wearing dark clothing. From what Naruto could see, the boy had an athletic build to him. The blonde was willing to assume that the boy had trained from a young age. Much to Naruto's surprise, the raven quickly turned around as if on edge and had pinpointed the blonde in moments. Naruto saw something in his eyes as the two looked at each other. This boy was desperate for something, like he wanted an escape. This intrigued the blonde. It was as if the boy was mirroring his own feelings. Without noticing it, Naruto had continued walking and slowly the unknown boy got further and further away. Naruto turned his head, snapping back to reality as he looked back towards the direction of his apartment. Weird, Naruto thought to himself before mentally shrugging. He was tired. That training session really did a number on him. It may have even been worse than the beatings he got afterwards. What he did notice though was that the dull pain from the assaults seemed to be less and less notable each time the beatings happened, as if he was slowly adapting to it. Sasuke looked down at the small lake that surrounded the pier. Coming here always helped him to collect his thoughts. Still, with the revelation from his father's scroll in his mind, he couldn't help but feel incredibly nervous. It felt like there were people watching his every move, but whenever he snapped around in an attempt to catch them in the act, there was never anyone there except for the blonde that had just passed him. Strange, I don't remember seeing him around the other children, Sasuke pondered as he gazed at his reflection in deep thought. Crimson eyes were staring back at him, and he couldn't help but feel proud of his bloodline. He had activated his Sharingan in act of defiance. Here he was sitting calmly in the village that wanted his clan dead, showing off his clan's signature bloodline. HMPH. Sasuke huffed as he stood up. He had better things to be doing than staring into a lake all night. He had to plan if he was going to succeed after all. I don't know how, but I'll get out of here for sure. He declared to himself as he clenched his fists with determination. He sighed as he opened the creaking door to his apartment. Things could be better, that's for sure, but he didn't complain about it. Instead, he walked inside and proceeded to lock the door behind him, like he did ever since the villagers started beating him. He was soon sat at the kitchen table, the steaming smell of ramen warming his face, intoxicating him as he looked down at it. It's no Ichiraku's, but still, the blonde thought happily before slowly eating the meal. He took the time to enjoy it. At home he didn't have to pretend like he was some bottomless pit. The only reason he ate like that in public was so that he could finish the meal as quickly as possible. He was sure that there were fewer customers at Ichiraku's when he was around. Naruto began thinking about his day. He usually did this after coming home, always trying to be unbiased to pointing out the good and bad points to himself. He would have to admit he did try not to name all the negatives, just to put a positive spin on things, even if it was slightly cheating at his own game. Still, the blonde couldn't help but think things would be better somewhere else. After all, he was a loner who had no responsibilities and no ties to Konoha. The only thing holding him back was what held him back in many other ways, the nine-tailed fox. He had to admit he appreciated Kyuubi after meeting with her in his mindscape 3 years ago. Without her he doubted he would be as capable as he was right now. Her teachings in general knowledge and combat were priceless to him. However, he was still a Jinchuriki, something that a hidden village like Konoha wouldn't simply let walk away a free man. Although the blonde knew that he was monitored from time to time, he was sure he could at least escape the village. It was after he'd escaped that was the hard part. He didn't know how long he'd be able to flee from trained hunter Nin, though he imagined himself to be able to do quite well in locations he knew as the advantage would be his. I guess running from the villagers is good for some things. He considered adding his positive spin to things. Naruto continued to think about leaving the hateful village like he usually did, sprawled out comfortably on his bed as the moonlight poured in from his large window, the old radiator producing just the right amount of heat to make the room have relaxing warmth to it. The small moments of this peaceful activity quickly became Naruto's personal sanctuary in everyday life. He dove deeper into his thoughts, his imagination getting the better of him as he wondered what it would be like traveling the world and meeting friends who wouldn't discriminate against him. He dreamt of becoming a strong and praised ninja that people could look up to, but the parts that came after that discomforted him a little. With him being a runaway, he doubted people would look up to him. In the end, he guessed that it didn't matter after all. If he did what he believed was the right, then he'd have no regrets. Naruto sighed heavily. I doubt I could do it alone. Sasuke had awoken early, like every morning since his plans began. It had been 4 weeks to be exact. He slid open the wooden door leading to his back garden, noting that the morning sun hadn't even risen yet. The Raven had found himself enjoying this time of day, much like his brother Itachi used to. Perhaps it was an Uchiha thing. The silent mornings were so peaceful that it helped Sasuke to calm down and think rationally, the tranquility only being complemented by the occasional singing bird or the relaxing backing track of the pond's flowing water. Sasuke sat Indian style with his eyes firmly closed as he immersed himself in deep thought. His investigation over these last few weeks had been subtle, well planned, and if he had to evaluate his performance, he would say that it was definitely something he was good at. People were generally easy to read, especially when trying to appeal to the last Uchiha. He considered all of the upcoming Kunoichi first of all, the ones of a similar age to him, had all been branded as useless, as they simply were not interested in training. The Raven felt as though he had matured, feeling at peace to the extent that he was starting to remind himself of Itachi, even despite his paranoia, but he couldn't help but harshly critique the girls of his age. He needed the best he could get and so far they seemed more likely to weigh him down. He let out a sigh, deciding to go over the candidates in his head one more time. It was best to be thorough for something like this after all. Sasuke considered time and time again that this was in fact a life-changing decision, meaning it should be treated as such. He certainly wasn't going to do this half-heartedly. The girl named Tenten who seemed motivated had caught his eye. A weapons expert, however, was something that he didn't find to be all that extraordinary. Any ninja could become a weapons user with just practice alone. He didn't believe it to be enough to become a specification, nor did he believe that she was the best choice for his escape. She didn't even seem to have any reason to leave, which left her as a solid no. Despite her attitude, I don't think she'd ever be of use to me. Sasuke critiqued. He considered it a shame that the girl was not into ninjutsu. She really could have been a great asset to the last Uchiha. The shy girl named Hinata had also came to his attention. Despite her lack of confidence and skill, she did have the Byakugan, which was something that he could definitely make use of in one way or another. A Kekkei Genkai like that was not something that he could find just anywhere, though despite her hardships within her clan, he doubted she would leave with him. Besides, he needed someone he could rely on, an equal. He already had a pair of special eyes. Despite this, he still considered her an option. Her unique fighting style and useful clan techniques were definitely not something he would shrug off. Her attitude could always be altered. Living in the wilderness would surely change the sheltered girl, Sasuke thought to himself absent-mindedly. There were of course many more girl candidates than this, however he didn't feel that they could even keep up with him, never mind be of any use. This was to be expected though. Many ninja children would often live as any other child would until they reached the academy. Going over the list of boys his age was just as pointless, or so it seemed. Some of them did practice with their clan heads, which was something that he made note of. They managed to look more reliable than some of the civilian bunch at least. Shikamaru was someone he considered an option. A genius tactician would be very useful to have, but the boy really didn't seem the type to run away and risk everything. The boy was lazy and didn't seem motivated to do anything except laze around. His clan's techniques would be useful one day, but as the boy was now, Sasuke didn't even think he could use any of them. Shikamaru also had loyalty to the village through his clan. He really couldn't be a viable option at this point. Niji was a great find, a skilled Hyuga who was apparently a prodigy, and during Sasuke's investigating, he confirmed this with his own clan's eyes. To the Raven's disappointment, Niji was proud and incredibly brash. He doubted that he would become someone he could rely on, but considered the possibility that his strength would make up for it. After learning of the caged bird seal however, he figured that Neji could be easily taken care of by the Hyuga clan head should he ever try to leave the village. Sasuke considered this a shame as the young boy was a member of the branch clan who knew what limits would be put in place in order to ensure that he didn't surpass even the most elite of the main house. Sasuke considered that the boy would most likely be better off training outside of his clan if he wanted to reach his true potential. All in all though, Neji couldn't be the person Sasuke needed. A sudden memory came to Sasuke, the blonde that had passed him on the pier was strangely nowhere to be found. Initially he considered this a good sign, but after learning the boy was a loner like himself, he thought that perhaps the boy was already dead. Until he saw the blonde pass him by the pier again, that is. At that moment he had caught Sasuke's attention. Sasuke's curiosity escalated as he struggled to find the blonde and soon he found himself researching the boy. Surprisingly with little effort he learnt that the blonde's name was Naruto Uzumaki, the demon brat of Konoha. After digging deeper to find out why he was named as a demon, initially thinking it was a compliment of his strength, Sasuke managed to discover that the boy was in fact the keeper of the nine-tailed fox. That was some demon he had sealed inside him. Sasuke began thinking highly of the blonde, a container of such a demon could perhaps be worthy to be his partner. Upon discovering the way the blonde was treated by the villagers he had considered that Naruto probably would leave if he was ever given the opportunity. What irritated Sasuke was that he had no idea how to find the evasive boy except for waiting by the pier and even then he wasn't sure the boy would show up. During the time at the pier he was never able to approach the boy, in fact he was lucky if he even heard him pass by. The blonde's stealth was something that would be valued when escaping. I'll find him today. Sasuke mused, confident in his ability. His trademark was becoming more of thinking hum than a rude conversation ender. But the feeling of being watched finally getting the better of the raven, he went back inside, only to see an ambush shunching away out of the corner of his eye, perhaps it wasn't paranoia after all. Sasuke walked through the house before reaching the front entrance, although he needed to find the blonde there was something else he had to do, he had been doing a lot more than just investigating people after all. The raven decided to head to the village wall, for a wall so large, no blind spots would be unlikely, but first of all, he needed supplies. Naruto had been busy, really busy. All of his things had been sealed, this was his ingenious plan to cut down on weight. Nearly everything that he considered essential was sealed into the small scrolls that were stored inside a simple black backpack. However this wasn't the only thing that had been keeping the blonde so busy lately. His hellish training could be mentioned, but most of his time was consumed doing strenuous research, he found this difficult with his status, spying on villagers was too suspicious for his reputation. Something that he did manage to discover was that the raven-haired boy he had seen by the pier appeared to be doing the same thing as him, only with a lot more success. This was essentially something that Naruto could use for himself. Not willing to pass up an advantage, he followed in the shadows as the boy gained information, using his prestigious clan status and what Naruto believed to be charisma to get what he wanted. Naruto decided he would be able to get what he wanted by using his stealth alone, it was perfect. Although this wasn't his preferred method of reconnaissance he had to admit that it worked and he had figured that pretty much all of his other candidates would be semi-useful at best. Although I don't really think they'd have much reason to leave anyway. Naruto thought while rubbing the back of his head a little disheartened by the revelation. The only candidate who stood out to him was the raven-haired boy. Doing some investigating of his own, Naruto discovered that the boy was Sasuke Uchiha, the last remaining Uchiha, and there were rumors that he had already awakened the Sharingan. This was definitely someone that Naruto could rely on. After seeing the boy train for the majority of the day, Naruto had to think long and hard about which one of them would win if they were to fight, but his efforts were in vain, and he soon gave up. Today he would follow the raven as usual, but this time he had different intentions. He had to learn more about the boy and find out if his plans were similar to his own. The blonde was laid lazily in a tree, insisting to Kyuubi that it was in fact a very important personal mission. After a few hours of lying there happily, he saw his target. The Uchiha walked into a store and minutes later came out with a plain black backpack. The blonde watched on as Sasuke entered a weapons store, purchasing a suspicious amount of kunai and shuriken. It seemed like too large an amount just for training purposes. The boy also went on to add ninja wire to his backpack, which perked Naruto's curiosity. What Naruto saw next confirmed his thoughts, this boy was trying to escape just like he was. Perfect, he had an ally if he didn't make any mistakes. Sasuke headed casually to the village wall, unaware that the blonde was watching him, he headed down some of the narrow cuts and alleys, instead of taking a direct route which seemed peculiar to Naruto at first. It seems he's trying to plot a route, well, he'll never find one as good as mine. Naruto thought triumphantly to himself, he was now walking along the rooftops in a bored-looking manner, looking down at the Uchiha who seemed totally oblivious. With a sudden movement the raven snapped around, looking directly in the place Naruto had previously been. Phew. That was close, haha. Naruto mused while rubbing the back of his neck. If he hadn't quickly jumped backwards out of sight, the raven would have caught him for sure. Guess I'll have to be more careful, he considered before trailing the Uchiha once again. Sasuke had made it to the edge of the wall now. Seeing this, Naruto leapt into a nearby tree, taking a seat while watching the boy with amusement. Sasuke was walking along the wall with a bored look on his face. His hand was trailing along the huge monument as he walked, and he seemed to be checking for something with a great amount of care. Every so often Naruto noted that the boy seemed to look towards the guards, then would quickly return to studying the wall. So that's what he's doing, Naruto realized as a grin formed on his face. Seems like he's even better than I thought he'd be. Naruto thought to himself, perhaps he will make a good ally after all. Kyuubi agreed, leaving Naruto nodding his head in approval. I have to be careful, if someone notices that I'm studying the guards I could be in trouble, Sasuke warned himself cautiously. Things had been going too well. For a village that probably wanted him dead, he knew that he had to be on his toes at all times. HMPH, perhaps they were planning to test my loyalty in the academy. I'll be long gone by then. Sasuke thought confidently. Well, here it goes. Naruto thought, preparing himself before transforming into his disguise. With a puff of smoke he became a bland-looking jounin with almost no memorable features. Now that he was hinged, Naruto could approach the raven without an issue. Confronting the small Uchiha in front of him, he couldn't help think that it was strange being so tall all of a sudden. Hey Sasuke, is it? The jounin said lazily, causing the boy in question to turn snap to attention, obviously on edge. Instead of answering, Sasuke just looked at the man, hoping that he would continue. While trailing along the wall he had been watching the patrol patterns, and not only that, he had been scoping the area, searching for a path he could use to escape the village. Sasuke was currently having great difficulty with this, as he did not know the winding alleyways and cuts well. What are you doing all the way out here? You must be bored senseless. The jounin said with a smile. It was infectious, and for some reason the Uchiha felt himself smiling also. Sasuke decided he would answer half-truthfully, a ninja tactic he had learned from trial and error when telling stretch truths to Itachi, but even then it only worked some of the time, and he was sure Itachi was just letting him get away with it. I was studying the wall. I thought with it being so large it must have weaknesses. If I found any I could inform the Hokage. The wall protects the village after all. Sasuke spoke stoically, not daring to add emotion to his voice in case he gave something away. He was nervous about this, his paranoia driving him wild as the jounin seemed to be contemplating something. He had felt uneasy around authority ever since he had read his father's scroll. Ah, it's that so? It's always nice to see the next generation so eager to protect their village. Naruto replied kindly, under the guise of the jounin. This seemed to ease the fretting boy a little, but he needed something that would tell the boy he was also planning to escape without being considered suspicious. Suddenly the idea clicked in his head. If he could help Sasuke in some way, then perhaps he would be a little more trusted and display that he was useful all in one move. How about I accompany you? The jounin smiled. He didn't look threatening, but Sasuke wasn't fooled. However, he was in no position to turn the high-ranking man away. Thanks, was the short answer the raven gave. Soon the two of them were walking along the great wall that protected the village. Sasuke had made sure to feel along the wall, keeping up his act as he walked. Annoyingly, it had now become increasingly difficult to monitor the patrols, thanks to the jounin accompanying him. They had walked some distance, then the jounin suddenly stopped, earning the suspicion of the young Uchiha. The raven looked at the jounin expectantly, who then slightly tilted his head towards the huge wall. Immediately Sasuke saw what he was looking for all along. This section of the wall had no patrols. He was sure that he could make it over this section, using the buildings that were the closest to the wall that he had seen all day. Whoever this person is, he's been planning. Sasuke thought, a little on guard. However, in a puff smoke the jounin disappeared. In place of the man was a small blonde, who he instantly recognized as Naruto Uzumaki, the boy he had been searching for the last few days. As the smoke cleared he saw the boy grinning widely. Hey. Naruto greeted happily with a large smile on his face. Sasuke was surprised. He had been fooled, though he accepted defeat quickly. He considered it an advantage. The person that had fooled him was the person he had been searching for, so it had saved him the effort at least. He seemed knowledgeable in an escape route too, which instantly made him a valuable ally. I guess my search is over. Sasuke mused as a smirk spread across his features. I've been looking for you, Naruto. The Uchiha spoke confidently, hoping to surprise the blonde with the fact that he knew who he was. I know, I've been watching you the whole time, Naruto replied with a knowing laugh. You really did help me with researching possible allies, but I was watching the one with most potential the whole time. Talk about lucky. Naruto chirped enthusiastically to the not-so-happy looking Uchiha. Well, at least I know you're not useless. Sasuke replied calmly as he began to walk away from the unmanned segment of the wall they had traveled to. With his hands by his side, Sasuke signaled for the blonde to follow him. A little confused by the use of hand signs, Naruto decided to follow the boy before realizing where they were headed. Naruto began to walk in the direction of his apartment instead of following the boy to the Uchiha compound. The Raven questioned him with a glance but saw the hand signals for halt and river. The message made sense to Sasuke as he translated it to mean wait at the pier, the place where they first saw each other. Sasuke waited as instructed, staring down at the water below the pier. He was calm and felt no presences nearby, though his Sharingan was activated just to be sure, his paranoia getting the better of him as he took the first steps of what he considered to be his way out of the village. The blonde soon came into view again, except this time he had a black backpack with him, much like the Raven's own. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at this, but Naruto walked on inconspicuously as if having nothing to do with the Uchiha. After a short distance the blonde gave a subtle hand signal that indicated he was ready to proceed to the Uchiha compound. The two of them honestly felt like this was a serious ninja mission, as bizarre as it may have seemed, but really, it was a personal mission, a mission to escape Konoha. The two were chatting until late that night, each of them discussing the many scenarios they had came up with and planned for, each helping to spot the flaws in the other's plan. Naruto's plans were somewhat better prepared, having an ancient demon sealed inside you was apparently more help than he let on. Two figures raced through the constraints of the Uchiha compound, shrouded in dark clothing they were invisible in the pitch-black night, the two of them would make their escape tonight. Heading straight for the exit of the compound, they were soon weaving through the backstreets of Konoha, silently slipping towards their destination, using a cleverly devised route for optimum stealth. Leading the way was the blonde, well versed in the shortcuts and hidden alleyways of the village. The two hurtled through the village at a speed unexpected of the average 7-year-old, though not unheard of. Thoughts of a silver-haired Jounin being a Chunin at the age of 7 years old ran through Naruto's mind as he wondered if he too could one day be considered a prodigy. However, this was left to the back of his mind as he navigated his escape route. The raven-haired boy could be seen closely behind the blonde, the red string the boy had wrapped around his wrist, making him easy to follow down the winding streets thanks to his crystal-clear vision, his Sharingan glowing against the darkness as he swiftly moved towards the nearing escape point, although he wasn't the only one with red eyes at this point. Naruto's blood-red eyes were an effect of being trained by the Kyuubi within him, a gift from the great demon that allowed him heightened sight, although that was its only ability. Although it was no Kekkei Genkai, it was incredibly useful to have, and his vision stretched far beyond that of the average human. Its vision could be considered parallel to the Sharingan, however he lacked the other attributes of the Uchiha bloodline. The air was cold and the streets were silent, however the two knew that there were definitely ninja present on the streets. This wasn't one of the great shinobi villages for nothing. The tranquil night stars were blinking at the two below as Naruto turned to look at the Hokage building for the last time. I wonder what it would have been like if you actually cared. Naruto thought before steaming on ahead. Memories of the Hokage were happy ones, he had to admit. However, the man was a genius shinobi and the leader of a shinobi village. No matter what concern he had shown, Naruto guessed it to be fake, or at least out of sympathy. After all, he was just a man, a very busy man at that. He had no hard feelings about it. If anything, he was happy that the man at least gave him the time of day and was always kind to him, but at the end of the day he was just another shinobi to the blonde. Sasuke's heart was pounding as he continued on. He was going to do it. After the work had been put in, he was finally making his escape from the village that would want him dead. He knew, however, that it wouldn't be easy. The plan was to escape the village from the slight gap in the patrol that Naruto had shown him. From there they would simply flee, covering as much ground as they could without stopping for as long as they could go. They had, of course, in their careful planning considered that if they were to overexhaust themselves in covering ground, then were somehow caught, they would be useless to make any sort of attempt at escaping. No, they had until around noon the next day before the whole village was aware that they were missing, or so they believed. As soon as their exhaustion became taxing, however, they were to rest while being as well hidden as they could be. Rest was something prioritized highly. Their energy would certainly be needed if they were to succeed. Sasuke couldn't help but feel excited. His new life was about to begin, no matter how hard it may be. He had someone he could truly consider a friend and equal, but he could only imagine what hardships were in store for the both of them. He looked over at the blonde in front of him, wondering what they would face together in the near future. He wanted to be prepared for whatever it was and couldn't help but feel like the two of them could face any challenge. For the first time in a long while, Sasuke felt as if he could trust another person. Shaking his head clear of thoughts, the Raven decided now was not the time to get distracted. But the adrenaline surging through his body, he didn't care about the challenges anymore. He'd never felt such a rush before. He felt alive. He was choosing his own path and making his own decisions. He was escaping. As the blurring streets passed by in his peripheral vision, he continued, chasing the red string bound to his friend's wrist as they dashed through the night. Naruto suddenly leapt, wall jumped 3 times between the two buildings before he had enough height to land gracefully on the roof. Crouching down in an effort to lower his visibility, he was soon joined by Sasuke. Naruto smiled to the boy before turning back and looking to the large wall that stood before them. They were just meters away, ready to make the jump. Naruto took a deep breath, his breath hitching slightly as he looked over the village that would soon become just a distant memory of the life he never wanted. From the corner of his eye, he saw the raven looking over the Uchiha compound with hardened eyes. They were ready to move on. But the nod the Uchiha gave the signal, the patrols facing the opposite way wouldn't even notice them as they landed on the wall silently, not taking the time to even steady themselves after landing. They leapt down the huge wall, the wind rushing through their hooded hair as they made their descent. They looked at each other one final time to check all was in order after their landing. After they each nodded to the other, they rushed into the forest, not looking back. The adrenaline still fueling their bodies from the rush of escaping a shinobi village powered them to move as fast as their bodies could handle, the trees of the forest rustling from their pace as they made their escape. They ran through forest after forest, the dense trees offering perfect cover for their getaway. Even if they were followed immediately, it would be difficult to pinpoint their location in such a surrounding. The earthy mud below them offered no sympathy to their aching legs, as the varying terrain only served to make running as uncomfortable as possible. They had no idea how far they had gotten, but it wasn't far enough. Seeing a river in the near distance, the boys headed straight for it, rushing through it without faltering, in order to put off their pursuers. The boys hoped that the simple trick would help to buy them even a little extra time, and when escaping from a major hidden village, any extra time was good time. Their breathing had become extremely ragged as their bodies struggled to get the oxygen they needed, but the two didn't stop. They weren't tired, but simply feeling the strain of testing their limits. They could go on for hours yet, they had to, or they would surely be caught, and all of their efforts would have been in vain. The two soldiered on past the tempting offer of resting or setting up camp, using all of the techniques that hid their tracks that they could remember in an effort to at least delay whoever was sent after them. Hours had rolled by and they began to slow. The blurring landscape became more and more visible as time passed. Their legs were heavy, their bodies refused to go on until eventually they came to stop. Looking up at the sun in the morning sky, they assumed it to be around 10 am. They had covered a large distance and would have to find a monument or nearby town to check their map to figure out exactly where they were. For now, however, they were sat catching their breath in a hidden cave, deciding that the best course of action would be to sleep. Being deprived of it would surely have negative effects on them. The boys knew that in the daylight the cave could be a suspicious area, which would no doubt be checked by a tracking team. They just hoped that by the time they woke up that distance they had covered would make up the difference. They had ran for 12 hours straight and were about to indulge in 8 hours of rest once they had eaten. The two sat in silence while eating, not quite knowing what to say to each, as they enjoyed the sensation of simply relaxing a little. The two finished their meals with thoughts of how to survive the next day racing through their minds. Naruto said goodnight, which eased the atmosphere between the two, and soon they were fast asleep, only hoping that their best was good enough. It was 2 p.m, and the third Hokage had just received some shocking news. In fact, he wasn't quite sure how to combat the situation at hand. He had just been alerted to disappearance of the last Uchiha and the 9 tails Jinchuriki, a heavy blow to the village. Even if they were but children, the man had an unwavering belief that the two of them would become strong. How strong he was not sure, in fact their escape might have doomed them to an early grave. The old man sighed. He had the elders breathing down his neck to send out tracking squads, and he agreed it would be for the best. The two would be great assets to the village when they grew older, and as of now they had the potential to be great enemies. Although currently the only strength the village had lost was their tailed beast, their military was not actually affected by the runaways, and for this the Hokage was thankful for. Still, he doubted that he could realign them with Konoha no, he knew what Sasuke knew. It turns out that the head of the Uchiha had far better insight than he had let on. The third nodded to himself as he remembered that Itachi Uchiha was son of the clan head, and he shown insight to the degree of it being like seeing the future. No, Sasuke Uchiha would not be fighting for Konoha anytime soon, and the Sandaime certainly did not believe in brainwashing. As for Naruto, he imagined that the situation within the village walls had finally become unbearable for the poor young boy. He felt truly sympathetic to the blonde, however he had a whole village to think of, and if he was seen to be too friendly with the young Jinchuriki, things could quickly go bad, leading to uproars and insubordination, leaving the Leaf village prone to enemy attacks and spies. He had no choice. He turned to the Anbu within the room. Mark down Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto as A rank missing nin. If they are seen, they are to be treated as immediate enemies of Konoha, however do not engage until their motives are known. Send out tracking teams, give them until midnight tomorrow, maybe it isn't too late to clear up this mess. The man said in a hardened tone. As he finished he took a long drag on his pipe before exhaling the calming smoke to fill the room. Excuse me Hokage-sama, the Anbu stepped forward, bowing as he did so. I don't mean to question your judgment, but don't you think A rank is a little far-fetched? They're just kids. The man passionately spoke. After all, there was no way a couple of brats could be considered A rank threats. The Sandaime closed his eyes, letting out a hollow sigh as he did so. The reason I have ranked them so highly is not because of their current strength, and technically the two of them cannot even be classed as missing ninja, as they didn't even join our ranks. The elder explained. Then the Anbu questioned, still confused of the Hokage's motives. Those two are in possession of things that many people would wish to obtain. If they were ranked at their current power, they would surely not survive. Which would a person be more likely to attack, an A rank threat or a C rank? The Hokage explained to the somewhat puzzled Anbu operative. Despite being runaways, the two of them are still Konoha citizens, not even ninja. They should technically be allowed to leave the village at any time due to Kyuubi and the Sharingan. However, the Hokage trailed off as if not wanting to continue the thought. So you wish to protect them from threats? I see, but Hokage-sama, if I may, what about the time limit given to the tracking squad? It doesn't make much sense. The man nervously offered. The third let out a grumble in his frustration. It is as I said. They deserve their freedom. If they can escape a high-ranking tracking squad for that length of time, they will at least show that they are capable of looking after themselves. If not, then they are not ready. The two of them, however, are no longer interested in Konoha. If we bring them back, they will only rebel or attempt to escape again. Still, if they are not ready, at very least we can delay them until they are. The Hokage said somewhat sadly. In honesty, he would miss the young blonde dearly. Hokage-sama, I see, I'm sorry I doubted you. The Anbu operative spoke before bowing low. Amazing to have thought of everything in such a short time. It is no surprise that he's the Hokage. The Anbu thought to himself before leaving the office in a cloud of smoke. The Anbu tracking squad were surprised to say the least. The tracks of the boys had been covered completely from their time in the village last night. They had no idea in which direction they had headed. Even after asking the guards from the night shift, they found no evidence. After fully searching the nearby forest, however, they managed to get a lead, and their mission began. Moving at speeds only capable of Jounin, they raced through the land of fire in order to capture their objectives. Though they were finding it increasingly annoying to find clear tracks of the boys over and over again, it was as if they had someone experienced with them. However, all evidence indicated that there was in fact only two people involved in the escape. However, stopping and starting during a hunt was nothing to Anbu, and they were soon at it again as they followed the strange routes towards their targets. The Inyazuka member was irritated more than usual, having been rendered an ordinary Jounin thanks to two brats and their ability to remove their scent from the area by traveling through so many rivers. She snarled under her mask. At least they put up some form of challenge. It was 6 p.m. when the boys awoke. They packed up everything before setting fire to the whole cave. This would act as a distraction for sure, and any evidence of who was there would be disposed of with the fire. It was a risky tactic, but the time that their trackers would spend looking for evidence would buy them some time, as little as it may be. We need to move again. Sasuke stated, in which the blonde sat opposite to him nodded. They should be getting close by now. Naruto informed, if they had only slept for 8 hours like planned, they should have a little time left, but not much. They'll be expecting us to go to the border. It would be better to do the opposite. Sasuke thought aloud to the blonde, who nodded in approval. We'll head into the thicker forests. We'll have to be careful. The blonde ordered, and with that the two raced off, leaving the blazing cave to be discovered by any pursuers. Seems we're going to be doing this the hard way, Sasuke thought to himself as he imagined living in the wild. They did bring basic camping equipment, and they were fairly sure they could survive in the wild for short periods at a time. Being constantly on the move would mean that they would also be harder to find. Naruto looked at the boy deep in thought before him. The two were still on edge, and they had fled one of the major villages. Although it would be perfectly fine for ordinary civilians to leave the village, the last member of a prestigious clan and the nine-tailed Jinchuriki weren't considered ordinary civilians. I bet they're already plotting to kill us. The blonde thought sadly to himself while following the raven ahead of him. We should stay away from villages and main roads as much as possible. I'm not sure where we are right now, but if we try to outrun them in a straight line, they'll catch us. Naruto spoke wisely. His experience with running away had really helped them, but he doubted they had much time before the Anbu were hot on their tail. The order will surely have been given by now. Sasuke sighed, unsure how to continue. After collecting his thoughts, he spoke again with a deep frown dressing his face. I'm not sure what we can do if they spot us, but I'm not going back there. He said with determination, his fists clenched at the thought of being dragged back to the village they had just escaped. Naruto looked as if he was deep in thought for a moment before nodding to the Uchiha. We have no choice but to keep running. We're no match for them. He said in a disappointed tone. The blonde had no intention of being taken back either. Sasuke let out a low growl before answering, let's move. But that the two of them sped up, entering the denser forests. The trees were unimaginably tall, and instead of traveling by the ground as they did the previous night, they opted to take to the treetops for speed. Have you heard? A young blonde bellowed at her friend, unable to contain her emotion. She was really freaking out about the news. The pincat covered her ears on reflex. Ino could really be loud sometimes. Naruto has run away from the village. The blonde yelled, confused by Sakura's lack of reaction. But they'll catch him again, won't they? Isn't he dangerous? That's what my parents say at least. Sakura answered calmly, there was no way the Hokage would let them be in danger. Ino wondered how Sakura could possibly care about something like that in such a crisis and knew that the thoughts would be long gone when she gave her the missing piece of the puzzle. I don't care about that. Sasuke-kun has left with him. The girl shrieked in despair, much to the discomfort of poor Sakura's ears. What do you mean he's left with him? You mean Naruto kidnapped him? How did he manage to do it? Did he use his evil demon powers? Sakura shouted back, clearly distressed. Please be okay, Sasuke-kun. Someone will rescue you soon. I bet you fought to protect the village from whatever it was that idiot was doing. I guess my parents were right. She thought to herself, imaging Sasuke bravely facing an evil-looking Naruto to defend Konoha. Demon powers. Ino questioned, looking at the cherry blossom in disbelief, however shook her head silently, which confused Sakura momentarily. My parents always say Naruto is a demon and I shouldn't go near him cause he's dangerous. He didn't seem all that bad to me, even if he did act like an idiot. She informed the blonde, who in response just sighed before taking in a deep breath. Sasuke-kun left the village with his own free will, his home was searched, and plans and documents detailing nearly every genin candidate and their potentials were found hidden around the house. Sakura shook her head violently in defiance to the information. That can't be right. She protested inwardly, there's no way that Sasuke would just leave, why with Naruto of all people? She questioned, it didn't make sense to her. Both of them have been added to a list of wanted ninja that my dad calls the bingo book. Dad says that tracking teams have already been sent to find them and depending on their actions, they might be classed as true enemies. Ino explained in a solemn tone, when her father had told her about the news she had almost screamed, how could Sasuke just leave like that? That can't be right. Sakura mumbled, refusing to believe it, there's no way that can be right, why would they leave? Why would Sasuke chose to leave with Naruto of all people? Didn't you say he had information about all of the genin candidates? Sakura asked, she was having a hard time getting her head around what had happened. I don't know much about that, Ino replied, a little downhearted by her lack of info. Maybe Naruto was just the best candidate. None of us have seen him fight after all, Ino considered, but the cherry blossom didn't seem to buy it. Maybe he was the only person who wanted to leave. Sakura replied, seemingly happy with the reason she had thought of. Slowly the information leaked across the village. Many of the young genin candidates were among the first to find out, although most were indifferent or even glad that they had left, some were angry, declaring them as traitors of Konoha that didn't deserve to live. HMPH, how troublesome, the village is making such a fuss over two runaways. Shikamaru mumbled lazily to his friend Choji. The boy was snacking on some potato chips while nodding to his friend in agreement. He really didn't think it was such a big deal. What's so special about those two anyway? The boy asked loudly in between mouthfuls. Shikamaru just sighed in reply and looked back to the clouds, watching them float by. He closed his eyes and sighed again. Boy, have you two heard the news? The two heard a boy yell aggressively, followed by the sound of barking from the puppy that was laid atop of the canine-looking boy. Kiba. Oh yeah, we've heard all about it. Choji replied, somewhat surprised to see the Inizuka. How could they just run off like that? Cowards, no. It's worse than that. They're traitors. Biba declared to the group, he couldn't understand why they wouldn't be loyal to the village, it was unforgivable. Boy. Shikamaru. What do you think? They should be hunted down, right? He yelled, trying to engage the lazy Nara, but to his disappointment Shikamaru just sighed before speaking, you're too noisy. By now most of the Jounin had received word that the two had fled the village. Kakashi Haddock was among those who volunteered to bring back the young Uchiha. There were fears that there could be a rendezvous with Itachi, and other than the Hokage or Jiraiya. Kakashi figured he would be the best option to combat the Uchiha. Although they doubted the young Uchiha would want to be reunited with his elder brother after the events of the Uchiha massacre. However, even a small chance couldn't be ignored, especially after the scroll Fugaku Uchiha had left for the young Raven. The boys panicked at the new foes that appeared before them. They hadn't even been in the dense forest for long, yet they were already being confronted by enemies. Bandits. They thought cautiously at the sight of the men lined up to face them. It appeared that the area wasn't as uninhabited as they thought. It starts here, Kit. Kill them. The nine-tailed fox said gently in the boy's head. The words seemed intoxicating. He felt the doubt leave him and looked suddenly calm. Naruto could see the Raven was on edge, but he'd die before he let it show. This would be the first time either of them had killed, but out here in the wilderness they didn't have the chance to regret it. Sasuke held his breath as he glared back at the men looking their way. He hadn't activated his Sharingan as the fight hadn't started yet, but he could feel it coming. It was in the air. The shivers that he felt down his spine only served to excite Sasuke, and soon he was so focused he could hear his own heart beating. What the hell are kids like you doing all the way out here? One of the bandits questioned aggressively with a scowl on his face, and before the boys could answer the others joined in. Oi. They look fit and healthy to me. Looks like we found some new workers. A bandit yelled enthusiastically, causing the other bandits to break out into laughter. You too. If you don't want to die, get over here like good little brats. The laughter supported the man's outburst, but they soon became angered when the boys didn't move. The more you fight the stronger you'll get. The Kyuubi purred in the same tone as before, in her miniature form in his converted mindscape that consisted of a tranquil forest clearing in which he used to train, the temperature not too hot and not too cold, a warm breeze would blow frequently, and the lazy clouds in the imaginary sky would lazily drift by. As she whispered the words to him he could almost feel her nine tails wrap him in a loving hug like she so often did. If he hadn't gotten to know the Kyuubi he would have viciously denied her, branding her a killing machine who only wanted to be set free to wreak havoc all over again, but now he felt the wisdom in her words and the loving care they seemed to hold. Sasuke, Naruto said in warm, gentle voice. The raven looked at him slightly surprised by the surreal tone, it sounded incredibly calm and carefree. Yeah, Sasuke replied more shocked when his own voice replicated the blonde's, his activate Sharingan seeing into the blonde's mindscape and hearing the guiding voice of the Kyuubi that had helped them plan and take action in their escape before he gave his soft answer. They turned to the bandit seemingly in a trance, the men looked confused as they stared at the two. I dunno what the hell you're doing, but it looks like you wanna die. The bandit roared and suddenly he and his 11 companions charged at the small boys with their weapons drawn, out here it was kill or be killed. The man swung his sword with deadly force aiming straight for Naruto's midriff, while another bandit aimed to pierce Sasuke with his spear, as if the whole world was slowed down. The boys seen the attacks heading for them with slow after images following, there was no way they could be struck by attacks like this. Then suddenly the rush came, adrenaline flooded their bodies and the world sped up. Sasuke felt a wave of feelings rush over him, and before he even knew it, he knocked away the spear and swept the attacker's legs from under him, leaving him to fall on his back with a thud, but before he could attempt to get up a kunai pierced his throat. Naruto saw the sword slowly passing through the air in the position he used to be in. After easily sidestepping past the slow attack the world came back to full speed, the rush of battle coming to him in full force as he landed a swift elbow to the man's temple, killing him in a single strike. Although the move was a killing blow, he was certain it would never work on a trained fighter. Suddenly the fight was on, the bandits surrounding them 5-1. The boys worked hard to dodge and parry the weapons attacks with their kunai, eventually being forced to wield two just to fend off the onslaught of attacks. The bandits unmerciful began to pressure the two boys, it seemed that they really intended to kill them rather than use them as slaves. Shit. We can't die here. Naruto raged as his attacks found new vigor, his rage fueling him as he attempted to knock back his enemies with his strikes. He saw Sasuke doing the same, it was similar to lashing out in a controlled manner. Sasuke dodged a sword slash from his right, his one-tomo Sharingan spinning desperately in order to save him from life-threatening attacks. He leapt back to evade two spears from the front and countered a bandit's dagger that was aiming for his throat with his kunai. His blade dance continued as he struck and parried and repeated. The high-paced action was like nothing he'd experienced before. This fights like these. This is insane, I've never worked so hard before, Sasuke thought while focusing on the task at hand. As he moved he felt his soaking lock strike his face, the sweat pouring from him. He ducked under one of the attacker's horizontal slashes aiming for his throat, rotating as he did. His grip on the kunai reversed, and in one flowing movement he slashed open the man's stomach before rolling forwards to evade a spear thrust. Naruto managed to evade a spear thrust that would have pierced his cheek. As he leant left he felt the blade graze his cheek, feeling the cut open immediately as the spear passed him by. He thrust his left-handed kunai into the throat of the enemy before kicking him free from the blade, just in time to parry an oncoming sword, crossing both of his kunai in an X formation in order to strengthen his defense. However, he was soon forced to leap away to the left as another bandit joined the brawl. Sasuke was breathing heavily as he downed another opponent that wouldn't be getting up again. Fighting 5 enemies in a fight to the death was definitely something he wasn't used to. He was moving faster than he ever had just to survive, forcing the strength into his arms in order to block, push back and counter. Slowly but surely he was winning. The 3 bandits that opposed him consisted of the dagger user and 2 spear fighters. After leaping out of the way of a quick strike from the dagger he flipped in the air, his Sharingan working like a lock-on system as he reached into his weapon pouch. Shortly after he had thrown 8 shuriken in an X formation which rained down on the spear fighters who had no way of parrying the deadly weapons. "You little shit. I'll kill you. I'll definitely kill you," the enraged dagger wielder declared and quickly hurled his dagger at an unsuspecting Uchiha, who only just managed to roll out of the way. However, as soon as he took his stance the man was upon him, wielding the 2 swords of his fallen comrades and slashing in a frenzy, leaving Sasuke working hard just to counter his onslaught. Naruto couldn't turn to look over to check on the Raven as he had his own problems to take care of. With this kind of pressure he didn't even have chance to use his shadow clones as attack after attack rained down on him. The sword user slashed for him from the front as a spear fighter tried to pierce his back. Relying on his speed, Naruto leapt out of the way of the spear, only to see it pierce the sword user in the heart. "You bastard," the spear user insulted, packed with murderous intent that Naruto was more than used to. The bandit pulled the spear from his dying comrade, not being given the time to prepare himself. The blonde's other attackers rushed him, leaving him blocking an attack from the left and the right, leaving him completely open to the oncoming spear, heading straight for him, or so the bandit thought. Naruto managed to push off the attackers that he was clashing with, and with deadly accuracy the kunai in his left hand was soon embedded in the spear fighter's skull. Naruto realized he was now vulnerable on his left side as a sword slashed at him with an attack that very nearly cut through his forehead. Without a Sharingan, Naruto had received a fair amount of cuts that were already healing, and relying on his instincts once more he leapt backwards, avoiding an attack that would have slashed open his arm. Sasuke was gritting his teeth as the constant battering his arms were taking from the constant flow of hits from the dual-wielding swordsman. He was only able to parry, the angered man not giving him the chance of a counter. The bandit was thankfully running out of steam, however. The attacks were getting slower, having less and less of a force behind them, and soon he was sluggishly waving his swords at the boy in hope that he would just die. Sasuke broke through the weak strikes with ease, and using his two kunai the Raven lunged forward, piercing the man twice. The blood poured from the man, and Sasuke felt it, the warm liquid flowing down his hands as stared down at them. Slowly he looked up, fully aware at what he'd done. As he saw the dying man's last breath, the young Uchiha gulped breathlessly as he pulled his blades free. He turned to look at the blonde fighting off his opponent. It appeared while he had been fighting, Naruto had managed to dispose of another one of the bandits, leaving him only with a swordsman who was slashing wildly as he was taking retreating steps backwards, trying to get away from Naruto. Naruto threw his kunai in quick succession. The bandit managed to deflect the first one, but the second penetrated his defenses and cut through his throat like paper. The man grabbed for the blade as crimson liquid flowed down his chest, a useless effort as he fell to his knees before crumpling to the floor, dead. Naruto looked over at the Uchiha panting heavily and was happy to see he was in good condition. Before he caught sight of the bodies that littered the clearing, he was soaked with sweat much like his Raven counterpart, but trudged over to the Uchiha, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We did it," the blonde said in between catching his breath as the two leaned on each other for support. The Uchiha just nodded, his eyes closed as the two walked over to a large tree that they decided to sit under while gasping for much needed air. "Oh, out here I like this, that was harder than anything I've ever done." Sasuke spoke while panting heavily. Naruto nodded as response as the two decided to rest before even speaking again. Strangely, the two had smiles on their faces. After overcoming such a difficult battle of life and death, they certainly reveled in their victory for a while. "The more you fight, the stronger you will get. After this fight you will feel stronger than ever. There is no training that can match fighting for your life," Kyuubi announced to the two who had decided to enjoy the peace within in the mindscape, the warming breeze, a relaxing sensation that made them never want to leave. The Kyuubi had each of them wrapped up in her tails, hugging them like they were her most precious belongings. "Sasuke, I shall make entering the mindscape easier for you, so you may deactivate your Sharingan." Kyuubi spoke softly. The Raven looked at her curiously, though by now he fully trusted the great fox. "There's a way I can enter the mindscape without using my Sharingan?" he questioned. It would make things easier, he supposed. "That's right, it will also allow me to bring you into the mindscape when I feel the need to do so. Give me your paw," the Kyuubi instructed, earning a look of confusion from the Uchiha. "Paw?" he asked incredulously. "Hand," he stated, correcting her with a frown. "Hand, paw, whatever. Give it here," Kyuubi commanded, a little embarrassed with her mistake. Sasuke moved his hand close to the fox, interested in what she would do next. To his surprise, she gently bit down on his hand between his thumb and pointing finger. A small amount of red chakra flowed from her teeth into the wound, then she released his hand from her jaws. "There, that should do it," she said merrily, then looked over at the young blonde who was sniggering at something. What is it?" she asked, a little flustered. It felt as if they were making fun of her somehow. "Hey Sasuke, you better get a bandage from your backpack, your paw's bleeding," Naruto joked before erupting into laughter, which was followed by a weak chuckle from the Raven. The Kyuubi scowled deeply. "We'll see who has the last laugh when it comes to your training." The fox huffed angrily, causing Naruto to let out a rather audible gulp. "Training? What's so bad about training?" Sasuke asked, feeling out of the loop. The Raven then caught sight of the horrified look on the blonde's face. "Naruto, are you okay?" he asked, confused by the new situation that was currently unfolding. "You have no idea, it's torture," he said with mock upset, leaving Kyuubi to be grinning with pride. "That's right. I'll be training the both of you more severely than you've ever been trained, so you had better be ready. My boys will be strong whether they like it or not," Kyuubi announced happily, seemingly forgetting about the teasing that had taken place. "Now, however, is not the time to rest any longer. We don't know how close your trackers currently are, it's time to move," she ordered. They nodded at her words of wisdom before opening their eyes, returning to the death-filled clearing. Blood littered the forest floor, and it would be difficult to cover all the evidence in a short period of time. The boys found themselves instantly missing the feeling of being gently held by Kyuubi. It was a lot less stressful than their current problem after all. Shit. What are we supposed to do with all these bodies? Sasuke quickly alerted Naruto. The blonde looked at the all corpses that decorated their surroundings before stuttering out words like in a vain attempt to form an idea. We set a fire to the whole area. It's the only way, shit, we have to get moving. Naruto panicked. The reality of being runaways suddenly hit them full force as they realized that while they had been fighting, their pursuers had surely been catching up. It'll still leave a trace, Sasuke mused, but before the blonde could interrupt, the Uchiha spoke again, remembering one of the basic lessons that Itachi had taught him about clearing up evidence of a battle. Collect all of the weapons you used, we can drop them in the river up ahead, they should float downstream and wash off any traces of us. He hurriedly ordered. Naruto just nodded an affirmative, and the two immediately went to work looting their weapons from the corpses of their enemies. They also collected the weapons used by the bandits before Sasuke flipped through hand seals, activating his technique. Heian. Pikaku no Jutsu, fire style. Fireball Jutsu, the Raven announced. A large fireball rocketed from the young boy's mouth, and soon the whole area was ablaze with a small fire. Without wasting time looking back, they raced towards the river in an attempt to rid the area of their trace. They could only hope that it would be enough, though the smoke acted like a beacon, they didn't have the time to worry about it. The Hokage contemplated. He had thought the young boys would have been found by now. It was getting late into the second day of their disappearance. If the tracking team were unable to find them by midnight, they were to return to the village. Perhaps I underestimated them. The old Hokage sighed, genuinely disappointed that they hadn't been brought back to the village. Though he could extend the time of the search, they seemed to be passing his test. If they wished to leave the village, he couldn't stop them. He just hoped that they were not threats to Konoha. It looks like their missing nin status will be invoked under the orders not to engage. Unclear, their motives are clear. The smoke from the man's pipe filled the Hokage's office as he thought about the matter at hand. I'm sorry, Minato, it seems I was unable to fulfill your last wish. The villagers turned against your child and have even managed to drive him away. I should have been more defensive of the boy. The third thought solemnly, he would miss the blonde and the Uchiha too to an extent, though he didn't know the Raven anywhere near as well. He liked to believe that he cared for all of the children in the village. The information that the two had left together had already spread across the village, with evidence that Sasuke Uchiha had planned to leave the village without any mention of Naruto, though all evidence found suggests that the two definitely left together. At least this would stop the council from pinning this whole thing on the young blonde. The civilians, of course, were blind with rage. How could the last remaining member of the powerful Uchiha clan escape their village? It was not acceptable. As for the Kyuubi container, they were more than happy to have rid of that burden. Most had voiced their hopes that the blonde was already dead. The villagers were incredibly malicious towards the boy. The tracking team, however, were doing their best to find the boys, their time slowly ticking away, with them being thrown off course so many times. It had become a time-consuming procedure, and time was what they didn't have. They came to a clearing that was charred black with ash. The Anbu looked around at the remains of the fire. There was definitely a fight here. It seems that the two had taken out a group of 12 bandits. Damn talented brats. One of the Anbu members thought to himself while examining the signs of battle that had been etched into the clearing. The smell of burning flesh had filled the air and dried blood decorated the ground. A loud beeping suddenly sounded, annoying the whole Anbu squad as they realized they had failed. The two boys sat under a colossal tree miles away. The night sky was filled with stars that shone down on them, the moonlight the only thing lighting the dark forest around them. They had ran many miles since their battle, but now we're too exhausted to continue. If they find us now, it's game over. Sasuke commented offhandedly, letting his head slump back against the solid tree they sat against. The blonde simply looked at him as if thinking for a moment, then spoke with a large grin. At least we gave it our best. We managed to get pretty far, don't you think? He said with a chuckle. A smirk reached Sasuke's face at his friend's enthusiasm. I suppose we have. I don't know why, but I almost feel like the search party won't reach us. The Uchiha though aloud. Naruto nodded as agreeing with the statement. Maybe the old man is looking out for us. Naruto said before flashing the Uchiha a foxy grin. I wouldn't be so sure about it after reading my father's scroll. Sasuke replied angrily, why would anyone from the village help him? They wanted him dead, he was an Uchiha after all. What do you mean, Sasuke? Were people in the village horrible to you as well? Naruto asked innocently, not fully understanding what the Raven was talking about. The Uchiha massacre was an order given to my brother. Itachi was innocent. He was forced to choose between letting the Uchiha wage a war or kill his own family. Only the Hokage couldn't issue an order like that. Sasuke explained while clenching his fists and frowning deeply. That village had almost poisoned his mind. He was nearly turned against his brother. Naruto thought for a moment, as if thinking how to explain something to the boy. I don't think old man Hokage would do something like that. He really hates killing, and he told me he's like a grandpa to everyone in the village. Naruto spoke happily, remembering his time together with the old man. If anything, I think it was probably the council. They're the worst kind of people, same for the elders too, and that Danzu guy. The council all tried to have me killed lots of times, but old man Hokage wouldn't let them. He told me to be careful around that creepy Danzu person. He said that he is a man who loves war. A third also told me that Danzu sometimes gave orders to the Anbu too. Maybe it was that guy's fault. Naruto explained. He looked over to the raven that seemed to be surprised about something. Him. It was him. My father's scroll mentioned that Danzu was a man who was not to be trusted, that he was someone that wanted rid of the Uchiha clan. If what you said is true, then he may have had the support of the elders and the council. Surely with that much authority even the Hokage couldn't stop them. Sasuke replied as everything began to make sense to him. I will have revenge for my clan when the time is right, he thought aloud. Turning to the blonde, he received a nod of support. I don't know if we're still being tracked or not, but we should sleep if we plan to move again. Naruto offered. The two of them were unaware that we're no longer being followed. They were safe for now. The tracking squad leader snarled. The brats had managed to get away, although she had a sneaking suspicion that this was partly because of the Hokage's strict 48-hour time limit. It seemed more than likely that the old man had gone soft and let them get away on purpose. They were just children after all, and not even criminals. They had simply left the village. Still, the Inuzuka didn't take failure well, nor did she enjoy traveling back and forth large distances with no results. She sighed before taking a drink from her canteen. At least the pace heading back was somewhat relaxed. The Hokage sat in deep thought. His Anbu tracking squad had not arrived yet, and the 48-hour time limit had passed. This meant that the boys had gotten away. He smiled despite this. At least he knew they were capable if they managed to outdo Hunter Nin, even if it was only for 2 days. For the boys, the hours rolled by quickly. The hours soon turned into days and the days into weeks, and before they knew it 3 weeks had passed. During this time they had been exterminating bandits day in and day out, using it as their form of training. After all, there was nothing like real combat. During the fights with the bandits, the two were limited, under the Kyuubi's orders, to use taijutsu only. With these limitations in place, the boys found it much harder to fight off the bandits' weapons, using only their bare hands. The adrenaline rush that the boys felt was no less than their first battle because of this. Every battle was a fight to the death despite their limitations. The first few days of this kind of training, the boys had come away with cuts and bruises from the numerous occasions that had been too close for comfort, but they learned quickly how to deal with opponents, using nothing but taijutsu. Just like Kyuubi had intended, they had no choice but to learn. It was kill or be killed. After 5 days had passed, they realized that they were in fact not being hunted by Anbu. They were sure that if they were being hunted, they would have been captured by now, as they slowed down to nearly a standstill on 3rd day of their escape. The boys began fighting with all the bandits they could find. Once they realized that they were safe from being seized by Anbu, their real training had commenced. They would spend a fair amount of time in Naruto's mindscape, learning about the world and the theories behind ninja arts. However, Kyuubi was surprised when the Uchiha had knowledge beyond that of fresh genin. After all, she had been teaching Naruto from a young age, so there was no way that he wouldn't have such a level of knowledge. This saved Kyuubi a considerable amount of time, and she soon moved on to intermediate chakra control exercises. The boys quickly grasped water walking, thanks to her patient and kind approach to teaching. She couldn't help but feel more and more motherly to the young boys. However, her strictness soon shone once she had limited the boys to only using taijutsu, and when she believed they were beginning to find defeating their opponents an easy task, she upped the training again, and the boys were now frantically fighting for their lives while standing upon water. Every time they lost control of the chakra, they were thrown off balance, causing a major disadvantage that they would have to quickly account for or suffer the consequences, which always meant pain. After a week had passed, the boys had grasped this aspect as well. Fighting for their lives always gave them that incredible focus that made grasping the task at hand far easier than they would have ever imagined possible. With the constant pressure from life and death situations, and the fact that they were always heavily outnumbered, caused their progress to skyrocket. Deciding to up their training to yet another strenuous level, Kyuubi thought that weight seals should be added to the boys. Although these seals were specifically made to replace old-fashioned weights that would impede growth, they certainly weren't any easier to handle. The two boys were suddenly dragged into the mindscape. Sasuke, still unused to the feeling, opened his eyes feeling dizzy, only to look around the lush forest clearing. Kyu, why did you bring us here? Sasuke asked in confusion. The two were currently taking a break from their vicious training after annihilating yet another bandit camp. Yeah, Kyu-chan, what's up? We don't have to study, do we? Naruto asked with distaste. The two of them were tired from fighting. Right now studying was the least of his concerns. It seems as if the two of you wish to push my training to new levels every time I come up with something new, the two of you adapt to it in a couple of days, Kyuubi explained with a heavy sigh. She expected the boys to grow quickly, but this was ridiculous, the boys only looked at each other with proud smirks on their faces. HMPH. Don't get too confident. Today we will be changing your training method. Kyuubi huffed much to the surprise of the two. Again, but you only changed it a few days ago. You'll really get us killed. Naruto whined, folding his arms to make his point, leaving Sasuke letting out a sigh. It seems like every time we become comfortable fighting with our disadvantage, we have to increase the difficulty in order to grow so quickly. Sasuke thought aloud while resting against one of the nearby trees, trying to recover from his dizziness. Kyuubi nodded her head sagely in approval of the young raven, it seemed he understood her training at least, and though Naruto complained she knew that he trusted her methods. From now on you will be using weights in your training, but not just any weights, these weights will be in the form of seals, meaning you will be the one to create them, Naruto. Not only that, Sasuke, you will begin working on mastering your Sharingan, I shall explain the theory of Genjutsu to you, and we'll work from there. Kyuubi explained the two of them, who seemed to be listening intently. Alright, just show me the seal design. Naruto yelled enthusiastically, with a nod the Kyuubi simply drawn the pattern in the mud below, allowing the blonde to copy it perfectly. Like this? The blonde asked, showing the fox his arm, proudly displaying the new seal for her to double-check. That should do, now do the same to your other arm and your legs. When you're done you can do the same to Sasuke. She instructed, setting the blonde off to work before speaking again, these seals may seem simple, but they're effective. She lectured, watching as the two activated the seals for the first time, the tattoo-like design began to glow a deep blue, then faded to black, as if nothing had happened. I feel so restricted. Sasuke complained while waving his arm around to test the new weight seals, the blonde growled in frustration at his now slowed movements, we have to fight like this all of the time, don't we? Naruto asked, clearly unimpressed, he had a feeling that he already knew what the answer would be. But of course. Kyuubi replied with a large smirk, happily swishing her tails behind her in an act of triumph, for some reason she could never resist teasing the two, it was simply too much fun. I knew it. Naruto declared, causing the raven to sigh, well if it will make us stronger, I suppose we can't complain, Sasuke considered while looking down at the markings on his arms that formed the seals. That's right Sasuke-kun, you should try to understand too, Naru-chan. Kyuubi said with a giggle, watching in anticipation as the blonde went from calm to furious in a matter of seconds. Chan, what do you mean Chan? Of course I understand. I get it. He ranted, much to the amusement of the fox, who was happily chuckling at his response. You know you fell right into her trap, right? Sasuke said, looking at the blonde unimpressed. HMPH. It doesn't matter, I'll master these weight seals in no time. Naruto declared in defiance, leaving the Uchiha nodding in agreement. That's fine, as soon as you do I can merely increase the weight, yet another benefit of weight seals. Kyuubi replied merrily, this time even the Uchiha was surprised at her antics, what do you mean they'll increase? He roared, it was hard enough to move with any sort of speed at this level of weight, with a higher difficulty he'd be reduced to the speed of a snail. As you get used to the weights you'll also be gaining strength, soon you won't even notice you're wearing them. As soon as that happens we'll increase them, so that you continue to gain strength. She taught, Kyuubi wasn't merciful with her training methods, and the boys soon found themselves incredibly weighed down to the point where their previously high-speed movements became sluggish in comparison, although when they did land a hit the added weights did add force to the blows. Eventually the boys adapted to the seals, and by the third week she added an even larger amount to the weight, but like all her training methods, the boys quickly improved and were standing unaffected by their added weights. In combat they weaved through punches and kicks, then struck with attacks that left their enemies devastated. Kyuubi soon realized that this was the extent that the bandits could offer. Her new plans formed quickly, her boys were ruthless killers when they needed to be, which was a strange contrast to the little angel she taught in Naruto's mindscape, it really was entertaining to her in a peculiar way. She had a surprise for them though, something that would really test their abilities. The Hokage was at his desk, looking through various papers and documents, which was one of the less enjoyable parts of being a Hokage, still he soldiered on as he did every day. One of the documents however caught his attention, and at first he couldn't believe what he was reading, he instantly recognized the location close to where the two runaways were last seen, however that wasn't what surprised him. He stared at the number of bandits that had been removed from the area with slight disbelief. This was a monthly procedure. His Anbu monitored the activity of bandits all over the country to make sure that they weren't planning or threatening supply lines, though the thieves weren't particularly strong, they could still endanger merchants after all. The number he gazed down at was startling, yet very helpful. Clearing out bandits was something that the village rarely done due to the fact it was unpaid work. Of course, if the bandits were causing trouble, they were usually contracted to dispose of them. Mostly it would be ignored until this stage, so that it became a paid job. In the last 3 weeks, however, over 800 bandits were confirmed dead, as if someone had specifically been targeting them and annihilating them, and with the intelligence that came with being a wise old man, he deduced that it was his 2 runaways, but he couldn't figure out why for the life of him. He must have been missing something obvious. It would seem that those 2 are providing service to Konoha, even if it isn't their intention. Hiruzen mused while the Anbu present was slightly confused as to what he meant. Hokage-sama. The Anbu questioned, hoping that he would be filled in on what he was missing. Much to his satisfaction, the Hokage did in fact enlighten him. Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto seemed to have quite the vendetta against bandits, or so it seems. He said as he pushed the document towards the Anbu, who failed to hold in a gasp. To think that those 2 hadn't even received academy training and were clearing out bandits at a surprisingly fast rate. Are you sure it would be wise to let them go, Hokage-sama? The Anbu bravely asked the elder, who sat proudly behind the oak desk. The man took a slow puff of his pipe, as if pondering his options before speaking in response. They have shown no negative actions to Konoha. We have no reason to hunt them down. Besides, even if they were to be tracked, I find it highly unlikely that they would want to be taken back to a place they made such an effort to escape. To believe they would fight for the village they fled would be foolish. The Anbu just nodded in understanding before using the shunshin to disappear from the office in a cloud of smoke. The old man was left to get back to his work, which he was regretful of. He wondered just how strong those boys had become. It truly interested him after seeing the death count the bandits had received. He wondered how well the village's genin would do in comparison in the span of 3 weeks. They were also very talented, yet he somehow doubted that it would equal what the boys achieved, even if they were to use squads of 3 instead of the 2-man team of runaways. The boys were sat amongst a death-filled clearing. 30 bodies decorated the riverbank. As the boys took their steps back onto dry land, they looked at each other to see that they were in fact unscathed from the battle. Though Naruto had suddenly picked up that Sasuke now had 2 tomo on his right eye, the boy smiled but didn't mention anything, although he was incredibly proud of their progress. The fire blazed strongly as the boys left the area. Yet another bandit stronghold had fell to their strength, and it was becoming far too easy for their liking. Even with the added weights, the water walking and the strict no ninjutsu rules added to their training, they were still adapting too quickly to these enemies. They were on a completely different level to the lowly bandits that once threatened their lives. As they rested in a nearby clearing, they heard the voice of Kyuubi interrupt their small talk. "It seems that your training will need to be changed yet again," she said with a giggle after her statement. She was proud of the 2 and let it show often. Sasuke couldn't help but smirk, and Naruto followed her example by letting out a chuckle. "About our training, I don't think bandits are as useful as they once were," Sasuke stated as he considered the results of today's training session. Kyuubi nodded within Naruto's mindscape. "Yeah, it's getting a little easy," Naruto agreed, while nervously rubbing the back of his head. The thugs were no longer pushing the 2 as they used to. "Well, since you 2 are so close to the border, I suggest that be our next training area," Kyuubi informed them. It was high time they fought real ninja. Even if they were lowly genin, such opponents couldn't be underestimated by the boys. They still had much to learn. Kyuubi smiled. It was time for the real training to begin. Suddenly the 2 were in the mindscape. They had gotten used to the feeling of being forced into the mindscape by now. It was now a smooth transition from reality to the lush forest clearing that they now stood in. "Kyuubi?" Sasuke asked, confused of why they were brought here. She gestured for them to sit and they complied, as she decided to lie down on the soft grass herself. "Now that bandits are no longer suitable opponents, I believe it's time to start your real training." She spoke, not to discourage them. Their taijutsu had improved leaps and bounds. They were faster and stronger than any genin, that was for sure, though there was more to being a higher ranking ninja than just taijutsu. Taking this into account, their chakra control had also been thoroughly improved. "Real training? What do you mean, Kyu?" Naruto asked with his affectionate nickname. She nodded after thinking for a while, figuring out a way to explain to her young boys that their current training had been completed. "The schedule you follow will be no longer as of today. Instead, Naruto, you will be training using shadow clones." Before she could continue, Naruto interrupted eagerly with a question. "Shadow clones? I thought I didn't need to train my fitness like that anymore," he said as he tilted his head in a very fox-like way, showing his lack of understanding. "Shadow clones send all information they receive back to the original. This includes ninjutsu training," she informed. Naruto looked excited to hear that as he nearly bounced in place, wanting to start right away. "Naruto, you will be focusing your attention on your wind affinity chakra, meaning you will be learning wind jutsu." Sasuke looked irritated at the blonde for having such a useful way of training. Even if Naruto only made 1 clone, the results would still double. That's an incredibly useful thing to have considering the amount of clones Naruto would be able to create. The Kyuubi giggled at the small raven's reaction. Don't worry Sasuke, you have your own advantages, you already know fire manipulation, and those eyes of yours will allow you to learn techniques just by seeing them, however right now you would only be able to use fire-type skills after observing them with the Sharingan. I suggest while Naruto learns wind manipulation you learn lightning manipulation. I shall transform into Naruto in order to demonstrate the basic fire techniques I have knowledge of, this will allow you to copy them Sasuke. You're lucky Naruto, thanks to my influence, you should also have the affinity for fire, meaning you are also capable of learning these techniques. Sasuke smirked after hearing he wouldn't be left in the dust after all. The two set off with their training soon after Kyuubi explained to them their tasks. Sasuke was to plant a kunai in the ground, after doing so, he placed his finger on the handle. He was told to imagine a current transferring from his finger to the kunai, and soon enough sparks danced around the kunai before evaporating. You really are a faster learner. Kyuubi commented in mild surprise as the boy managed to pass the first test of lightning chakra so quickly. Perhaps you also have an affinity in lightning interesting. She mused before turning to view Naruto's progress. The boy had made 10 clones, he was capable of creating more, but if he limited himself to 10 the mental strain would be non-existent. It was good to see the clones fail 5 times in a row each, taking mere minutes, before one of the clones jumped up enthusiastically holding up 2 shredded pieces of leaves. Naruto had performed the exercise 62 times before managing to grasp it, the clones proving their worth. Those shadow clones will speed up your progress a large amount, after today this is what you will be practicing on mornings. Eventually you will have control of your respective elements and will be able to create your own techniques as you please. After mastering your affinities you will work on other elements, they will be much harder to grasp, but you are capable. For now we will move to the second exercise. She informed acting as their teacher. Second exercise. Sasuke asked, his straight-to-the-point nature still remaining despite his overall improved behavior. The fox merely nodded and instructed them to head north, not doubting her, the two followed her commands and were well on their way before they suddenly felt their weight seals be released for the first time in nearly 3 weeks. Almost instantly they shifted with speed that surprised even them as they rocketed towards what they believed to be their new training grounds. Iruka couldn't be happier, the class that he had gained 2 weeks ago seemed like they were on their way to being great ninja, they all worked hard, or he liked to believe so as they half listened to what he was saying. They all did well on the original exams that were handed out to test their various areas of knowledge. He was happy to see that nearly all of his students were at the same level, except for one Shikamaru Nara who didn't write anything down and was currently looking out of the window staring at the clouds. Well, he shouldn't be too hard on them, it was only the beginning after all. He sighed in content as he considered how things would pan out for the young genin in training, he was sure they would go on to surpass him, that's what all teachers hoped for after all. Alright kids. Break time. Iruka announced suddenly, the thankful children sped out into the yard with a cheer, they had been cooped up all day and the weather was too good to be wasting. Ah, much better. Shikamaru said lazily as he lay on the soft grass staring up at the clouds floating slowly by, his friend Choji was sitting under the shade of a large tree beside him, trying to be quiet while he ate his chips. Suddenly Kiba was seen punching his palm as he came over to the two with his feral grin, much to the lazy shadow user's disappointment. HMPH, I heard that the two runaways have been fighting bandits, why don't they fight real opponents like ninja? They're cowards that's why. If I ever see them I'll show them the strength of Konoha. He announced with a thumbs up to his friends expecting them to cheer him on. I'm sure they'll run in fear when they see that tiny puppy on your head troublesome. Shikamaru mocked with a bored tone, the last thing he wanted was the noisy boy interrupting his piece. Oi. Don't make fun of Akamaru. He'll grow up to be huge, you'll see. Kiba declared defensively, making overly large gestures of Akamaru's eyes, only for the dog to bark in agreement. Sure, Shikamaru said only partly paying attention, while engaged in his favorite pastime hobby of lying around doing nothing. HMPH. I'll go find someone who appreciates my courage. Kiba said before storming off, although Shikamaru was more than happy to return to peace and quiet. What's so good about those traitors anyway? I'm twice as strong as those two put together. I don't even need to try. Kiba though confident in his own abilities as he went to laze under the shade of a large tree with Akamaru falling asleep on top of his head, he'd be a genin in no time, then everyone would realize how strong he was. We'll see him again I'm sure of it. Ino chirped as she tried to cheer up the cherry blossom, who nodded solemnly in response. The two of them didn't really care for being ninja, they only cared about Sasuke, to the point in which they even entered the academy. Now that they were here they would be considered fools if they were to declare their real objectives of entering the academy to the rest of the village. I wonder what he's doing right now she thought to herself wondering about the raven. She shook her head and tried to focus on the here and now, Sasuke was gone. As much as she didn't like to admit the raven had left the village without even a word to her, he really did consider her just an annoyance after all. Sakura realized what a stupid mistake she had made joining the academy. She was going to be risking her life as a ninja from now on. After realizing this, she decided she would do her best in studying. She was sure she'd be no good at the practical side of things, so she could just ignore that until she was a genin. As long as she passed and became a genin, then she didn't care about her grades in the physical side of things. The academy was filled with energy as the new students adjusted to their new everyday life, a comfortable and relaxing time for them all. Eventually they would become genin and be considered respectable ninja. Quite the opposite of what the two escapees were currently going through. Sasuke ducked under a kick. It was his first time fighting another ninja to the death. The clearing that they were in was a perfect battleground, spacious and surrounded by trees for cover. However, currently the two were engaged in taijutsu, with Sasuke having the upper hand. The genin he was facing was enraged by the evading Uchiha as he lashed out with aggressive but coordinated attacks. It was clear to see that genin were far harder opponents than bandits. Sasuke took a blow to the ribs, and before he could bring his guard up, the genin had hit him with a vicious roundhouse, punishing his jaw as he staggered backwards. As Sasuke got a good look at the genin, he considered it a good thing the two had no affiliations with the Leaf. After listening to Kyuubi's orders, they found two genin which seemed like perfect opponents. They had no idea what they were doing in the Fire Country, but they were definitely from Iowa, but for some reason their forehead protectors had a deep slash running through village symbol. Sasuke had no time to continue the thought, however, as his Sharingan warned him of an oncoming strike, a fist aimed for the bridge of his nose. Seeing it in good time, Sasuke struck the boy's wrist with a palm strike, parrying it successfully before sweeping the male genin's legs from under him, temporarily having him stumble as he regained his footing. Soon the fast-paced battle commenced, the two of them constantly attempting to strike the other down while parrying oncoming strikes, creating what looked like a well-choreographed dance. The genin before him gritted his teeth as Sasuke struck over and over without feeling the strain, though his genin opponent was becoming more and more sluggish in his attempts to land a blow. Sasuke, trying to seize an opportunity, attempted to break his opponent's jaw with a powerful roundhouse. As the blow neared its destination, the genin leapt back much to the surprise of the Raven, and two kunai flew towards him. Having no chance at dodging, he'd drawn a kunai of his own to defend himself. After beating down the oncoming kunai, he saw the smirking genin as he threw smoke bombs towards Sasuke. Suddenly the area around him was covered in thick smoke. His eyes struggled to see through it as he made out the vague shape of the enemy, thanks to his Sharingan, allowing him to barely parry away the oncoming volley of shuriken. Sasuke flipped through hand seals while staring at the dark figure of his opponent through the thick cloud of smoke, deciding to use one of the Uchiha's most common moves. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. The Raven shouted before a blazing sphere erupted from the cloud of smoke. It hurtled straight towards the startled genin, who after seeing it, leapt to the cover of the trees, but Sasuke wasn't finished. He ran straight out of the smoke while he had the chance and followed the boy to the treetops. Flanking the genin, who was now in a state of panic while looking for his opponent, Sasuke leapt into the air. The genin caught sight of him as Sasuke threw two shurikens straight at the boy. The shuriken missed by a long shot, flying straight over the boy's shoulders, one on each side before the genin sneered at him. "You'll have to do better than it if you want to beat me," he announced before getting into a taijutsu stance. Sasuke smirked as he landed gracefully on a thick branch, using the steel wire wrapped around his fingers, pulled the shuriken towards the blind side of the genin. The genin was quick to react as he turned to see the shuriken approaching, not quick enough however, as the blades nicked at each of his shoulders, leaving thin cuts as he snarled towards the Uchiha. Sasuke saw him grit his teeth in pain while he made his approach, but before he even made it to the boy's tree branch, he saw the Iwaruge flipping through hand seals for a technique that he didn't recognize. The tomo of his Sharingan began spinning wildly as he deconstructed the technique before the boy had even finished the hand seals. Earth style. Rock fist. The genin roared as he completed the technique. Sasuke saw earth spread across the boy's arm before forming what looked to be rock armor. Before Sasuke could land and leap away, he was struck with a crushing punch to the ribs from the newly activated technique, which sent him flying out of the treetops. He flipped through the air as he compassed himself, managing to land in a crouching position as he recovered his breath from the blow that knocked the wind out of him. The pain from the vicious strike was still present as he felt a dull throb in his ribs. This doesn't even compare to fighting those bandits. They were strong in numbers, but singled out they were nothing like this. Sasuke analyzed as sweat crawled down his face. The genin leapt confidently from the trees, his rock arms still intact. He made an attempt to crush Sasuke under the force of his aerial attack. Sasuke leapt away as soon as he saw the oncoming attack. After knowing the strength of that punch, he didn't even try to counter the blow that left a small crater in the ground that it struck. As the boy used his left hand to try and pry his stuck rock arm from the newly formed crater, Sasuke threw two kunai with deadly accuracy. As they flew through the air, a familiar sizzling sound met the genin's ears. As he dislodged his rock arm, he instinctively used it to block the kunai which threatened to pierce his skull. The genin's eyes widened as he remembered where he had heard the sound. He saw the Uchiha standing proudly as he heard what would be the last words he heard. Boom. After Sasuke's announcement, the kunai detonated and 2 explosions shook the small clearing, leaving the Raven ready to declare his victory. He let out a low growl upon seeing the smoke clear. His opponent stood in a full suite of heavily damaged rock armor, panting from exhaustion. "Why, you'll pay for that, you bastard." The genin threatened as he continued to catch his breath. The rock armor crumbled away and fell to the ground, leaving the boy seemingly vulnerable. Sasuke wondered how to proceed. His arms were bleeding slightly from defending himself from the pieces of shrapnel that had erupted from the rock armor. He hoped his blonde friend was having an easier time than he was. "You better not die, Naruto," he thought to himself in desperation. The blonde in question leapt out of the way of another row of spikes made of earth. The enemy skilled in ninjutsu was proving hard to deal with as Naruto growled to himself. "I wish I knew those wind jutsu right about now." He raged inwardly as he threw 2 kunai towards the opponent, who in response calmly raised a wall of earth, easily defending against the weaponry. Naruto landed and the earth wall made its descent. The genin glared at him once again. They had been fighting for some time now. Naruto's legs were bleeding from the constant evading of the spikes that would rise from the earth at a moment's notice, though his opponent was slightly bruised from the taijutsu blows he had received. Earth style. Rising earth pillars. The Iwaruge yelled. Naruto made several jumps backward scanning for the attack, but it didn't come. Suddenly, however, Naruto heard the ground behind him begin to rumble, his enhanced ears alerting him to the 4 large pillars of earth that was suddenly upon him. He leapt out of the way of the blows several times, but was shocked as the 4 seemingly indestructible forces twisted and weaved, seeking him out like homing missiles. No matter how many times the pillars crashed against the ground, they would merely burrow through the dirt and rise again with the same vigor. From the corner of his eye, he realized the genin's hands were still making a hand seal. The blonde smirked slightly before returning to the task of staying alive. Naruto fled to the cover of the trees, hoping that the compact environment would work to his advantage, slowing down the giant pillars. After working out that the genin was still controlling the attack, it would also work to hinder his opponent's vision. To his surprise, the pillars didn't slow as they simply broke through tree after tree like they were mere twigs. Just a little more. Naruto thought to himself as he narrowly evaded yet another attack from one of the pillars, the forest quickly thinning as he leapt to the tree tops. Even still, the pillars didn't stop as they smashed through the trees he was about to land on, his footing becoming harder and harder to find as he made his way back to the clearing. With one final leap, he was soaring through the air, his eyes locked on those of his opponents, the boy still forming that annoying hand seal. "Now," Naruto declared. As he did, 4 clones emerged from the treetops surrounding the boy. While the boy had defended his kunai with the earth wall that hindered his sight, Naruto had deployed his clones. After baiting the boy to attack him, the clones managed to position themselves, leaving the rock genin vulnerable. The 4 clones suddenly barraged the genin with kunai, the explosive tags flaring to life as the blades hurtled towards the unprotected boy. The real Naruto turned to see the giant pillars of earth behind him fall lifeless as the boy worked quickly to defend himself. 4 walls quickly raised, forming a dome of rock and mud that would defend him from the 8 explosive kunai that just embedded themselves into the dirt walls. The explosives struck and the walls received heavy damage, the boy visibly startled as he looked around to see his defense shattered. However, he didn't have much time to assess the situation as a swarm of shuriken was hurled towards him by the clones. Naruto growled as the boy easily dodged the projectiles. The fox boy, not giving the genin a chance to defend himself, charged straight at the Iwaruge. The sweat from excessive dodging was swept from his face thanks to the speed of the movement. The earth genin put up a hasty defense as he shifted into his taijutsu stance, his obvious weak point, as Naruto struck the weak guard over and over, his punches striking the boy's X-shaped arm formation repetitively as the boy did his best to cover his head from the vicious strikes, but the genin knew he couldn't hold on much longer. Seeing the boy's arms red from the beating, Naruto gave one final attack, spinning into a roundhouse that hit the dead center of the guard. The boy's arms fell out of their formation, leaving him staggering back from the force of the kick. Momentarily, the Iwaruge had forgotten about the clones, and it cost him dearly. They jumped gracefully down from the treetops and joined their master in combat. Now 4 against 1, the boy not suited for taijutsu was suddenly taking hits from all sides. Kicks and punches struck him again and again as he desperately tried to find a way out, but it was too late. One of the clones kicked him in the jaw, the force behind the kick knocked him upwards into the air, and with one swift movement, his unguarded throat was sliced open mercilessly by the blonde. The genin landed, lifeless. Blood leaked from his wound. Naruto looked down at his opponent, making sure that he was in fact dead, before letting his shadow clones poof out of existence. Naruto was about to turn away before he realized the Iwa headband. He considered taking it at first to ensure that they weren't targeted by any more ninja, but realized they were still in fire country. This could be incriminating evidence against Iwa. Leaving the body to be found, he went to find Sasuke after being separated at the start of the battle. He had to admit he was more than a little worried about his comrade. As he walked, he realized the amount of cuts he had received from those spike attacks. Luckily they would heal, but he figured that if he received a few more, it would have been near impossible to dodge those earth pillars. Ninja really are tough, he thought to himself, hoping that he would find a river nearby. He was worked hard by his opponent and now covered in dirt, bruises, cuts and sweat. I should find Sasuke first, he thought, the worry getting the better of him as he forced his bleeding legs to produce more speed while racing through the treetops. Sasuke smirked, his opponent was tired. The Genin's sluggish movement soon became less and less of a threat to the Uchiha, and with the boy's chakra diminishing by the second, his rock armor continued to fall away. Before Sasuke knew it, he was landing blow after blow on the boy, and soon it shone, the boy was staggering around, now defenseless from his attacker, as his crumbled armor lay in waste around the battleground. Sasuke was unrelenting and wouldn't miss the opportunity to finish of what was a tough fight. The boy swung hopefully, his sluggish movements easy to counter as his fist sailed past Sasuke. Seeing his chance, the Raven drawn his wire, and within moments he was behind the boy. The Genin's eyes widened as he felt the cold steel upon his neck. His eyes crawled to look towards his attacker for mercy, but the Uchiha, hidden from his desperate plea, didn't answer his request. With a violent tug, the steel wire sliced through the boy's throat, and with a dissatisfying squelch, blood flowed from the open wound. The Genin fell to his knees, gasping for air as he did, falling to the floor lifelessly. Sasuke considered his way of finishing his opponent somewhat brutal, but it didn't concern him. He had won in a battle of life and death. It didn't matter how it was done to him. He was positive that his opponent would have spared no moment in doing the same to him if given the opportunity. With a soft sigh, he was relieved to see a shaggy-haired blonde land within the clearing. The blonde scrunched up his face at the sight of the body behind the Raven. "Geez. Sasuke, do you have to be so messy?" he said while taking in the blood-sprayed surroundings. The Uchiha just shrugged, not really sure what to say in response. He considered the fact that he could have just used a kunai to finish it, but it didn't come to mind at the time. What's done is done after all. "Phew, I guess Genin are tougher than they sound, eh, Sasuke?" Naruto said as he slumped down against a nearby tree, lazily letting his head rest against the trunk as he looked towards the clouds. "Nothing we couldn't handle." The Uchiha responded confidently, deciding to take a seat next to the blonde. They were more than used to taking on opponents that were out of their league, but that was probably their toughest fight so far. It would appear that ninja may not be the safest of targets just yet. Perhaps it would be better to train in skill, ability and knowledge before messing with more of them. Kyuubi informed, joining the discussion as the voice of wisdom as she so often did. "Yeah, oh, and next time, we stick together," Naruto said with mock anger as he playfully shoved the Uchiha who had taken a seat beside him. With a smile, the Raven couldn't help but respond, "Chen. Do we really have to? I mean, I'm sure we can last a little longer on what we have." Naruto whined. He sighed, already knowing that he was wrong to believe the two of them would be able to survive any longer with the little money that they had left. He heard the Uchiha sigh heavily as if thinking before he spoke. The black high-collared, elongated V-neck shirt, along with the dark gray combat pants that he wore, was one of the many items that they had just recently purchased. "Naruto, we've been out here for 3 years now, we were going to run out of money sometime," the Raven said logically. He noted that the clothes that the blonde had chosen certainly made him look older. The white high-collared jacket that he wore open was something that he had considered while browsing the store. Of course, the two of them had been under a transformation to ensure that there was no trouble. Under the jacket, the blonde had chosen a simple dark gray tank top, and to complete his outfit, he agreed with Sasuke's decision to stick with black combat pants. I know. But mercenaries. Who knows who will end up working for?" Naruto complained, unhappy with the thought. He had lived out in the open for 3 years now. He had learned that people could stoop to incredible levels to get what they wanted. Although they had avoided civilization to the best of their ability for the period, they couldn't ignore society. While passing through towns, they did their best to find out what was going on in the world. It was important to their survival after all. Naruto wondered how long they had spent in cafes, listening to people gossip about information that was somewhat useful to them. Sasuke shrugged his shoulders. He didn't really mind what the job was. He didn't mind killing, at least. He did consider how he would feel killing random innocents. He didn't know if he was cold enough for that, although it irritated him somewhat to think he had become more like Itachi. He had to admit that it was true. Ever since reading the letter his father had written for him in that awful place, he had become a calmer, more forgiving person, or so he thought. Sasuke shook his head as he refrained from slipping into unpleasant thoughts. Thankfully, Naruto's voice helped to snap him out of it. I guess we can at least try," he said optimistically as they headed towards the location they had heard of. A man had apparently been taking in a large amount of mercenaries, a rich man at that. Although they heard that most of them were untrained men, Sasuke was sure that there would be at least a few rouges. I'm sure you're more than capable of looking after yourself no matter what happens, well, to an extent. Kyuubi provoked as she got her desired response from the blonde. What do you mean to an extent? Naruto retaliated with his fist clenched angrily at the fox speaking inside his head. Sasuke shook his head as he saw Naruto give Kyuubi the reaction she wanted. Well, I guess with your knowledge of seals and the training you received from me you'll be fine. Kyuubi said as Naruto could almost feel her proud smirk at him falling for her antics. He folded his arms and huffed in the most spoiled manner he could muster as the two boys continued to meet their new employer. In fact, it had just came into sight. It was a shady-looking place, as Naruto had expected. It looked like it was an abandoned warehouse, made from large sheets of navy blue corrugated steel that had begun to rust, showing its age. The entire area was surrounded by forest and would be difficult to locate without directions. Only now there were people everywhere, all with their various weapons strapped to their backs. Some of the more eager ones could be heard sharpening their blades in anticipation of the missions they would be sent on. Still, even with the area being populated, it wasn't a nice place. In fact, Naruto guessed that this rich guy was most likely some businessman that was needed a lot of dirty work taken care of. After all, that's generally the job description of mercenaries anyway. He didn't like the atmosphere of this place one bit and couldn't quite escape the feeling that he shouldn't be accepting this kind of job. Hey. Look at what we got here. Couple of brats that think they got what it takes. One of the men bellowed, his sword drawn as he paced towards the boys. The two of them had seen this scenario far too many times for their liking. The man seemed confident. He had a red bandana wrapped tightly around his head with white skulls decorating the material and had obviously decided that a shirt was not necessary, revealing an athletic-looking body. To finish his look, he wore black baggy combat pants that looked easy to move around in. Sasuke looked at the man with distaste as he edged towards them with a killer smile upon his features. His katana dragged along the floor, cutting through the soft earth in an intimidating fashion. "Oi. You little punk. What the hell you doing here?" he roared, obviously annoyed, but Sasuke looked straight through the man. He was already bored of this conversation and he hadn't even taken part yet. "It seems you are as stupid as you are weak. I should congratulate you. It must take a great deal of effort to act so pathetic," Sasuke commented with a bored tone as the two continued to walk towards the main entrance, completely making a fool of the man. Even Naruto was now grinning at Sasuke's comment despite trying his best to look serious. "You little shit. We'll see how tough you are." The man boomed as he lofted his blade behind his back and charged towards the raven. Suddenly, he fell to his knees. His face the picture of despair as his blade fell from his hands. Cold sweat dripped down his face as he desperately begged for mercy as he struggled to even breathe. Immediately he was released and was on all fours panting for his breath as the sweat dripped to the floor. He'd never felt anything like it. He'd accidentally attacked a ninja. Sasuke's 3-Tomo Sharingan was gone as quick as it appeared. With the man's obvious defeat, the Uchiha turned his gaze from the mercenary towards the entrance of the old warehouse as the two continued as if the event never happened in the first place. Although the crowd looked towards the two as if they were inhuman beings and out of fear and somewhat respect, the crowd of mercenaries parted to allow them the fastest possible route to the rundown building. As the two long-time runaways entered the building, they were met by two large men, both in black suits, who momentarily guarded the entrance, questioning the motives of the two boys. "We're here for the job," Sasuke said as he easily pushed through the larger man's blockade, and Naruto soon followed suit. To their surprise, however, the man spoke in a deep voice that caught their attention. "Ninja, huh?" he said simply before turning to see the boys that had to admit they were now curious. "You're at the wrong meeting point. Head north, can't miss it." He spoke with authority, perfect for his bodyguard-like role. Naruto couldn't help but sigh as they turned to leave again. Soon after ignoring the crowd, they were on their way north. They weren't sure what they were looking for until they saw a man sat calmly on a stone bridge that passed over a small river, not too far from their last location. The man tensed for a moment, alerting the boys that he knew they were coming. They decided to jump down from the treetops and into the open. This was a meeting for mercenaries after all. The man would probably be on guard. The first thing the two noticed was the abnormally large sword the man was carrying on his back. He stood up as if to greet them, and when he turned they could see that the lower half of his face was bandaged, much like a mask. The shirtless man wore a sword strap that he wore to carry the absurdly large blade. Other than that, his outfit seemed like standard mist wear. He wore the standard combat pants, as well as the standard camouflage arm guards. Besides the man was a girl who looked incredibly out of place. She wore an earthy green robe with a blue sash, underneath was simple combat pants, her hair was long, black and straight. She smiled as the two boys walked over to the bridge. It was kind and warming, making her look even more out of place behind the large intimidating man. "Oh, we're here for the mercenary job," Naruto said calmly before he received a look of anger from the Uchiha, but he couldn't help it, he really wasn't cut out for being formal. "I think they know that already," Sasuke hissed before awaiting their response. A small chuckle from the girl caught him off guard, and for some reason he felt that she gave off a sisterly feel. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. For a moment the man revealed a smile beneath his mask, but it quickly faded. "And Uchiha and the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, what useful tools." He spoke, excitement evident in his voice as a large feral smirk appeared on his face. Sasuke frowned at this, he knew that the man was obviously higher ranking than him, but his pride wasn't pushed aside all that easily. Duels? HMPH, who would agree to being named such simple things? Sasuke spat, clearly annoyed. The girl edged closer as if to stop a fight from starting before giggling again. "That is just Zabuza-sama's way of calling you useful," she said before offering a gentle smile. Sasuke felt his anger subside a little, he had to remain professional after all. "Whatever, if you think you're capable, let's move, brats." With that, Zabuza sprinted off without warning. Much to his surprise, the boys were by his side, easily forming into a four-man formation with him, being the Jounin, as the leader of the squad. He couldn't help but grin under his mask. In Uchiha, and the Nine Tails must be my lucky day, he thought to himself as they raced towards their destination. It didn't take long for Naruto's patience to run out. While looking at the overly large sword the man was carrying, the blonde had been staring at it since they arrived. "Oi, oi, where did you get such a cool sword?" he asked, full of curiosity. The ex-Mist Nin simply looked at him from the corner of his eye before answering the boy calmly. "Killing people has its gains," he said with a small chuckle. They didn't stop moving, but Naruto didn't question the sword any longer. Although he felt the man wasn't going to harm them, he didn't feel like pestering him either. "Don't worry, Naruto-kun, that's just his sense of humor," Haku said sweetly, hoping that their new companions didn't think ill of her master. Naruto just grinned back, expressing that he didn't mind the crazed attitude of Zabuza. If anything, it was entertaining to the blonde. "Where are we heading anyway?" Sasuke commented, looking towards Haku for his answer instead of the Jounin ahead of the squad. They had been running for some time now, and if Sasuke remembered rightly, there was civilization around here somewhere. Suddenly the Jounin stopped. The three looked at him with surprise, questioning his sudden action as he looked straight into a clearing. He'd drawn his sword, then looked to his makeshift squad before giving his orders. "You two, go with Haku to town, I have something to take care of," he commanded. Haku nodded to the Jounin, then continued to escort the boys to the nearby town. Zabuza leapt into the clearing on his own. Well, the boys weren't sure what exactly he was taking care of, they guessed it involved that sword of his. Eventually the three came to a small dock. It was just the one man and his boat. The boys couldn't help but notice that the thick mist hid his boat well. Looking around at their surroundings, they saw a large bridge in construction, but other than that the mist was far too thick to see anything other than the water close by. After some quiet words with the owner of the boat, the runaways saw him pale a little in mid-conversation with a seemingly sweet and gentle girl, then suddenly nodding his head and ushering the boys over to get in the boat. They could guess that Haku had convinced the man in a less than pleasant way, but they were in the same boat as her, quite literally, as they were acting as mercenaries, and she was in fact sat between the boys. They arrived silently on shore, and the boat owner quickly made his getaway. Much to the surprise of the boys, however, Haku informed them to head into town and look around. They weren't quite sure what was going on, but this was technically a mission, so they did as they were told. Meanwhile, Haku put on a mask that resembled that of an Anbu. After seeing it, they felt like they were on the run again and decided to head into the town. What they saw was saddening. The streets were packed full of homeless, and the stalls were deprived of stock. The people here were suffering, and it was easy to see that they were in need of assistance from other countries. After they reached the town, they did in fact realize that they had entered another country. This was the wave country that wasn't too far away from the fire border. "I don't know about this place, Sasuke, they look, well, helpless." Naruto spoke up. The Raven only nodded while giving his response. An idea came to mind as he looked around at the crippled country. "Still, there must be something we can do. After all, we're the bad guys." Sasuke had to admit he had nothing against the two mercenaries and wondered if they were in the same position as Naruto and himself right now, simply needing money to survive. However, they weren't the root of the problem. No, the man that hired them, Gato, he was the one who to blame for this. The large amount of mercenaries must have been some sort of makeshift army. Even better. I think both us and Wave could benefit from this. Sasuke smirked as Naruto looked somewhat confused, though Kyuubi thankfully filled him in. "Yeah, let's go somewhere quiet and wait for the others to come back," the blonde said. He thought he was somewhat fortunate that he didn't have a hit-IA tied around his head that basically said, "Look at me, I'm a ninja." To everyone around, it allowed them to talk a lot more freely. As they talked over their plans, they began to wonder exactly what had happened to their partners in crime. As the hours began to pass, they didn't let it unnerve them, as they weren't sure what was going on in the first place. It was plain to anyone that the mission clearly involved Wave in some way, and that Gato was probably trying to take over the country. Sasuke and Naruto came up with a plan that they would betray the man when given the opportunity, and if one wasn't given, they'd slaughter all that opposed them. That man was filthy rich enough to give Wave Country a fighting chance of getting back on its feet. Ah, so you were here, Haku said with a pleasant smile, however beneath it was worry that the two easily picked up on. The girl didn't seem quite as cheery as earlier in the day. What happened? Naruto asked, but the girl just shook her head denying him the details. Do not worry, it's nothing that cannot be handled, she said, her smile fading a little. She never did like to see Zabuza injured, but it was nothing the man couldn't deal with. So what now? Sasuke asked. Something had happened and they weren't being informed, in fact they didn't even have their mission yet. You're to stay in Wave Country, there will be ninja around, you should be careful. Sadly I have to leave you now, Zabuza-sama is waiting. She spoke calmly while distributing her orders, even if the three were sat in a quiet cafe, a habit that was hard to kick for the boys. We'll follow you out then. Sasuke said, offering for Haku to head out first. She smiled politely and headed through the exit first before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. The boys turned to head in the opposite direction. Sasuke. She said as her eyes opened in disbelief. She shook her head dispelling her confusion. I must be going crazy. She thought to herself as she looked around for any sign of the Uchiha. Obviously he was nowhere to be seen. Sakura was on a mission to Wave Country, her team's first C-rank mission. She thought that the bridge builder had been suspicious from the start but didn't expect it to go so badly. Still they were all in one piece, more or less, with only their silver-haired Jounin squad leader facing exhaustion from their battle with Zabuza. She sighed at the thought of calling it their battle. They were helpless, but worse, if anything they held back Kakashi due to their need for protection just like the bridge builder. She decided that her mind was playing tricks on her, seeing people was certainly not something she needed right now, especially when they happened to be someone who hasn't been seen for 3 years. She rubbed her eyes for good measure, deciding to head back to Tezuna's house. The bridge builder offered to let them stay after seeing that Kakashi was in no fighting condition, simply because of him lying about the rank of the mission. Sakura frowned, she could have been killed because of that old geezer's lies. Letting out a sigh, she realized that her life would be in danger from here on out. Looks like they're still after us. Naruto said as the two hid in a nearby alley. The headband was all they needed before Sasuke activated his Genjutsu. The two considered themselves lucky that even a weak Genjutsu like the one he used to disrupt her thoughts would work on any ninja. Sasuke shook his head, he doubted that was the reason they were in Wave. I think they may have had a run-in with Zabuza. Sasuke thought it would make sense for the two to be combating each other, and a team of genin would definitely have a Jounin for a squad leader, someone who would be able to at least go up against Zabuza. They knew nothing of the man's condition, but given that they had a week to kill, they didn't imagine him to be in good shape. Are we going already? Staying in a village all day feels weird. Naruto spoke unenthusiastically as he lazily leant against the wall of the alleyway. Sasuke just sighed before nodding. They had found themselves in a new country with time to kill over this job. They really had hoped for something simpler. Missing their normal scenery, the boys left to the nearby forest. As usual, Naruto placed seals in 4 corners, giving them a small space that would cause a simple trick of the eye to make it look as if they weren't there at all. It was a basic level seal that he had learned from Kyuubi. The fox remembered some of the basic seals that Naruto's mother had used, but the more difficult ones were something that needed to be practiced to be memorized at all. During the week they merely acted as they normally would, except for the added curiosity of when they were going to hear from their 2 associates, or if they were going to hear from them again at all. But eventually Haku had informed them that they were to head to the bridge that was under construction in 2 days' time. Expecting a fight, the two decided it would be best to take it easy and rest. Kakashi-sensei. You're awake then? How are you feeling, sensei? Sakura asked. To her annoyance, her Jounin sensei just groaned and rolled on his side. She felt a vein on her forehead and fought to keep her temper in check. Sensei, you remember where we are right now, don't you? It's been 5 days and we've already completed the tree walking exercise that you gave us. She said slowly as her rage threatened to surface. With a heavy sigh, the Jounin sat upright. He thought he could get away with another lazy day, but apparently the young cherry blossom had figured him out. He got out of bed, his exhaustion no longer present as he rolled his shoulders in an attempt to remove the stiffness from them. So you're finally up, sensei. About time. Kiba shouted happily as the small puppy sat atop his head barked in agreement with his master. Kakashi just combed a hand through his hair. Yes, Kiba, I'm up. Sakura tells me you've completed the tree walking. Kakashi said, trying to change the subject, and thankfully he was successful. Of course. It was a piece of cake, even Shikamaru can do it. As Kiba said so, the lazy genin walked through the door with bored expression that didn't suit his age. Troublesome, me and Sakura both completed it 2 days ago, we had to wait around for Kiba to finish. He said before yawning, he really was bored, these missions didn't suit him after all. Azuna-sen says that construction will start again in 2 days, sensei, what do we do? Sakura asked, her head tilted with curiosity as she asked her question. Kakashi looked at her as if she was stupid. We complete the mission, Sakura, what else? He said as equally bored as Shikamaru was, they had a few things in common that way. HMPH. The cherry blossom huffed, not happy with the grouchy Jounin's tone, still there wasn't much she could do about it. After all, it's obvious that Zabuza isn't dead. Kakashi stated, as the three had expected the Miss Jounin hadn't died that day. Kiba gritted his teeth, and the room went silent. So what? We beat him last time, we can beat him again. Kiba declared. Sakura couldn't help but look at her feet. To be honest, Kakashi was the only one who fought the man, and it was obvious they were no match. To make matters worse, there was that strange boy with the hunter mask. He was obviously strong, and Sakura wondered if any of them would be a match for him. She considered that if they outnumbered him 3-1, then perhaps they could defeat him, but they weren't even sure of his strength. That also means I could be overestimating him. Yeah, he might not be so tough after all. She thought to herself, trying to think positive. There was no point making the situation worse. She stopped for a moment and thought. Sakura? Kakashi asked, surprised by her sudden silence. She shook her head as if snapping back to reality. It's nothing, Kakashi-sensei, I guess I zoned out, huh? She excused as the Jounin looked over her suspiciously. She couldn't help but think back to the time when she was in town by herself. Sasuke, she wasn't sure if she should tell the silver-haired Jounin in case she really was seeing things. It could just make things worse than they already were. The last time we got lucky. Zabuza had never fought against the Sharingan before, but he won't fall for it twice. When we're on that bridge, I don't want you to do anything reckless. Our mission is to protect Izuna, not to kill Zabuza, remember that. Kakashi ordered. He knew the boy was quick to temper, and that could get him killed if he wasn't careful. Kiba let out a low growl in frustration, clenching his fists, trying to refrain from making a remark. Why does everyone underestimate me? I'll show them when we're on that bridge, they'll see how strong I really am. He thought to himself as the team was dismissed. In 2 days he would get his chance. Sasuke, Naruto questioned. It was early, the 2 days had dragged, but the day had eventually came. The blonde had awoken to thanks to the natural alarm clock of chirping birds. Yeah, let's go. The raven replied. The seals around them dispersed, and they soon headed to the bridge. Although they were in no rush, seeing as it was so early, they didn't want to be waiting all day after all. They had awoken at their usual time of around 4 or 5 am, being that the forest was only on the outskirts of the village. They didn't think they would even need to run. They knew the construction was taking place early in the morning, and that the lead construction worker, a man named Izuna, was their target. If they could, they would be using that man as bait to lure out Geto. After hearing the full story from Haku, Naruto couldn't help but wonder what Konoha ninja were doing here. He assumed they were here to assess the situation with the economy. After considering their position here, it would make sense for the Leaf to want to ally with a country so close to them, even if it was for trade purposes. Only He put the thoughts to the back of his mind as he walked alongside Sasuke. He was sure the two of them would be alright. They're here, Kakashi announced. Sakura froze on spot with her kunai held tightly. She was stood in front of Tizuna, the only member of the construction team who had even shown up. The rest of the team had caved to the threats of Geto. In no position to fight, eventually they felt no choice but to surrender. This didn't matter to Sakura though. It didn't matter how many people she had to protect, it still wouldn't have stopped her shaking. A thick mist descended over the area, ruining any previous visibility, causing Team 7 to struggle to make out their surroundings. However, the mist ninja looked totally unfazed. Sakura squinted, looking desperately towards her sensei, hoping for some kind of instruction, which would make this scenario any easier to bear. She saw Kakashi, the scarecrow Jounin, was ready for battle. His Sharingan pierced the mist, scanning for his targets that would normally be in plain view, though even he was having difficulty seeing through the density of the mist. "That I won't save you this time," Zabuza taunted. Sakura watched on nervously, then there was a clash too sudden for her to even make out. The sounds of clashing blades rang out through the silence of the bridge as the two did their best to slash open the other. The battle between Jounin was hard to watch for Sakura, her experience inadequate for the situation. She fought back her panic, as well as the urge to scream in fear. A soothing voice was heard amongst the battle to the death. "Please surrender, things will only get worse from here," she said gently. Sakura still had the belief that the newcomer was a boy, though right now it didn't really matter. "Yeah, right. We'll take you down." Right, Akamaru. His battle cry was answered by enthusiastic barking from the small dog as they took up an offensive stance. "You're no match. If you're going to attack me, at least involve your squad, otherwise your chances are zero," Haku said calmly. She had watched over Zabuza's battle last time, and she was more than certain that these genin were fresh, not used to a dangerous situation like this. Controlled by nerves, it didn't matter how strong they were, right now they were useless. "Troublesome, you sure know how to anger him." Shikamaru spoke, his voice calm as he analyzed the situation. He glanced around the area, weary of an ambush. "Perhaps you have control of your emotions, the two of you should be enough," Haku stated in a cold, unforgiving tone. Kiba snarled at his opponent's response. He couldn't take it anymore. "Bitsuga. Fang over fang," he yelled, and despite the war cry, Haku wasn't expecting the destructive attack that hurtled towards her with a deadly speed. She had seen worse however and leapt out of the way to the left as the attack collided with the bridge, leaving a nasty mark as Kiba skidded back into a fighting stance, glaring at his opponent which was about to land. As her foot gracefully touched the floor, Shikamaru smirked as he felt his prey ensnared. Shadow possession technique complete. He said confidently as he sat in his crouched position, "You should thank your teammate Kiba-kun, without him cleaning up your mistake, you would surely be dead." Haku said calmly, the boy glared at her while fiercely growling. "Don't underestimate me." He shouted, his rage reaching its limits as people continued to look down on him. He had to grit his teeth just to stop himself from charging her right there. "There is nothing to underestimate. You're too inexperienced like the rest of your team. Whoever thought you were ready to face enemies of our caliber was foolish to believe so." She retaliated. "We're different from last time." Kiba snarled. Haku couldn't help but laugh at this comment. "You think learning to walk up some trees is going to help you here? An interesting conclusion." Haku said coldly, wasting life was something she did not enjoy and this boy was definitely going to get himself killed like this. "HMPH. Says the one who's captured." Kiba said with a cocky attitude of victory. He folded his arms, realizing it was their win as he looked over at the ensnared ice user. "You're right, you did capture my clone, well done." The voice whispered from behind Kiba. As soon as the sound hit his ears, he leapt back into formation with his team, only to see the captured Haku fall in a puddle of water before his eyes. "Surrender. There is no point in continuing. The three of you have much to live for, one old man should not change that." She said logically, referring to Tazuna, the bridge builder they were currently attempting to defend. Kakashi was frantic, defending was all he was capable of right now, if he risked a counter-attack, he was sure his head would be rolling from his shoulders at the hand of that gruesome sword, he could hear his genin in trouble. The young boy, Haku, was right, he was foolish to believe they were ready to take on the mission to Wave, after realizing it was an air ank. The two jounin clashed again as Kakashi managed once again to fend off the huge blade with his much smaller kunai. "You should be careful Zabuza, one might think you're compensating for something." Kakashi taunted only to get a grunt of laughter from the man. "You're just upset your pretty eye isn't doing all the hard work for you." He retaliated calmly. His silent death attack made him in control of the situation, while his enemy was forced to defend. One slip and the silver-haired squad leader was a goner. "You rely on that thing too much it seems, I bet you've never even tried fighting with your other senses." Zabuza mocked, before disappearing again to strike the back of his opponent, who to his delight quickly anticipated the attack before slashing back with one of his own. "Fighting with my other senses," Kakashi thought to himself. He leapt backwards gaining some space from his opponent as he whipped through Hans seals. "Kaiten. Grand Fireball Jutsu." He roared as the huge fireball spewed from his mouth and flew towards the Miss Jounin who calmly jumped to the right, avoiding the technique with ease. Betting desperate Kakashi. He ridiculed but heard the Leaf Jounin slam his palm against the bridge. "Summoning technique." Kakashi shouted and as soon as he did a pack of nin dogs appeared, "Sniff him out." Kakashi ordered before the large wolf-like dogs raced off towards the Miss Jounin. He managed to evade the pack for a short while, though eventually he was captured. Seeing an opportunity present itself Zabuza used the replacement technique, as the dogs burst through a pool of water Zabuza reappeared behind of a terrified Sakura, aiming to assassinate Tazuna. However the Leaf Jounin was the one blocking his view, happily Zabuza decided to slash anyway, leaving the man with a rather nasty chest wound before the two leapt away into battle again. "Kakashi-sensei." Sakura shouted in anguish as blood flowed from the open wound. "Sakura. Pay attention." Shikamaru quickly reminded as Haku easily evaded his stretching shadow while fighting off Kiba's feral Taijutsu technique, still fully in control of the situation. "Hyoten. Icicle barrage." She spoke, holding off Kiba with his fist locked within her palm as she caught his punch. She used her other hand to form hand seals, much to the surprise of the genin, and as she finished large spear-like icicles formed in front of her. After they were fully formed they looked more like spears and suddenly flew towards Shikamaru. Leaving his crouching position he was forced to jump to the left to avoid being pierced by the now shattered icicles. With Kiba still in her grip the boy went for a right hook, his free hand going straight for her mask. Seeing it coming she caught it with her free hand, locking him in position, then brutally kneed him in his ribcage. The force of the blow had him staggering backwards, but his course was soon changed as Haku's roundhouse kick connected with his jaw launching him back only to land by Sakura's feet. "For the last time, surrender. It gets worse from now. For 2 reasons." Haku offered only for the Inuzuka to growl and stubbornly rise to his feet, glaring at the ex-Miss Nin. "Worse, how could it get any worse?" He growled at his opponent who was totally in control of the fight already. "I'm simply toying with you." Haku explained with a sigh, she thought the boy had at least figured that out. The boy growled again, but had no evidence of suggesting that his opponent was hard stretched during their fight. "Yeah, and what else?" Kiba shouted unnerved by the situation. "They've arrived." She spoke calmly, looking towards the bridge entrance where two figures emerged from the thick mist. They turned to look towards the newcomers, the two walking through the thick mist without saying a word. As they stepped onto the bridge, the sudden screeching of lightning was heard, the mist was illuminated a cobalt blue, and before anyone could react a battle cry was heard. Chidori. The sickening sound of flesh being pierced was all it took to know that Zabuza had just been well and truly defeated. The man fell to his knees as Kakashi ripped his hand free from the man's insides, never a pleasant job. He watched as Zabuza fell to his knees and lay in a pool of blood. The bridge was his last battleground. Zabuza-sama. Haku screamed as she saw the man fall lifelessly to the bridge. He looked towards her, his body losing its strength as he turned his head to look towards her. He was fading quickly and only had one final request for the ice user. The girl fell to her knees by his side, ripping off her mask, she revealed her tear-stained face. Zabuza-sama, she shrieked desperately as the man was about to speak. "I'll leave it to you," he said with a smirking, his eyes slowly shut for a final time. Haku knew exactly what he meant, Zabuza had left her his goals. Haku hugged his body, weeping softly onto the man's chest. She may have been a ninja, but this man was her everything. The least she deserved was a little closure. Kakashi had regrouped with his genin while the girl was mourning her loss, though he never felt even an ounce of guilt over killing the man, his heart was trained to neglect such feelings. "Now it's you who should give up," Kiba yelled, being as insensitive as he was, as well as ignoring the now audible footsteps. To his surprise, however, Akamaru started barking loudly, growling in the direction of the village. "Akamaru?" Kiba questioned, looking at the dog seemingly puzzled. He decided to sniff the air, causing surprise to flush across his face. "Guys. Someone's coming," he alerted, leaving Team 7 on guard once again as they awaited the newcomers. "Gyuden. Calming's effer," Naruto said without tone in his voice. He gently swung his left arm from right to left, and much to the surprise of the current occupants of the bridge, the mist disappeared along with the gentle breeze that had come and gone. The Konoha ninja took their time analyzing the two, their mouths slightly agape in surprise. The two that hadn't been seen in 3 years were now standing before them, looking calm and uncaring for the scene that had unfolded. It was difficult too for the Konoha squad to believe, what were they doing in Wave of all places? Sasuke, Sakura said softly, the words barely reaching the Uchiha's ears. She was holding her hands together in a silent prayer that it was really the boy standing in front of her. Sasuke looked at the girl for a few moments in silence, his look unchanging as he stared. "What is it?" he said calmly. The girl was shocked, she wasn't sure what to say, but without thinking the words came to her. "You're okay," she said happily, her voice expressed just how relieved she really was to see him. "So it would appear." Sasuke answered quickly, not sure what had come over the girl. Feeling she had been brushed off, Sakura's enthusiasm died down. "He doesn't even recognize me," she thought to herself somewhat sadly as she gazed at the now older Uchiha. It seems he hadn't arrived to sweep her off her feet like she had daydreamed back in the days of the academy. "Sakura-chan. Step away from Tazuna," Naruto said softly. The girl suddenly looked thoughtful as her eyes squinted, trying to get a better look at the blonde in the distance. "Naruto, you too." The gears in Sakura's head turned quickly as she realized exactly what was going on here. "Why? Why do you want to kill him? Don't you know anything about the Wave Country, about Geto? If you do, then why?" she asked desperately. Before they could answer, Kakashi commented. "I'd also want to know, Sasuke, Naruto," he said, glaring at the two, hoping to intimidate them. "They're traitors. That's why." Kiba roared at the two, refusing to let them escape their past. The dog boy honestly believed them to be criminals for not aiding Konoha with their strength. Akamaru agreed loudly with his owner, barking aggressively at the two newcomers. "Kiba." Kakashi shouted, infuriated at the dog boy. Sometimes the boy had no sense and would lose his temper like a child. It was something that the Scarecrow Jounin was definitely going to have to correct. Konoha refused to see the big picture, it wouldn't be the first time. Sasuke retorted, his calm expression betraying the harsh words that only Kakashi understood. "What big picture?" Kakashi answered quickly, hoping to get some incentive into their plans. Sasuke just smirked and looked away from the man, silently refusing to answer the question. Kakashi knew that he had information on Konoha now, meaning the man would be less likely to attempt to end his life, as an interrogation would be needed to find out exactly what he knows, and more importantly if anyone else knows. "We never said anything about killing him," Naruto answered in a bored manner which somewhat confused Kakashi. To most the answer would have satisfied, but to the seasoned Anbu captain, that answer seemed more like a change of subject from the Uchiha's conversation. "Don't believe him, Kakashi-sensei, they're both traitors to the leaf, you can't listen to a word they say." Kiba yelled disobediently, but before Kakashi silenced him, Naruto spoke. "Tell me, Kiba. Tell me what you would have done if you were beaten every day of your life for something you didn't even know about," he said calmly. The breeze that picked up only helped to intensify the pressure on the canine-like boy. Akamaru snarled at the gale that was being created around them. It was clear that the wind was created from dense chakra. You see Kiba, I found out everything that the village wanted me to never know. Naruto stated coldly. The Inuzuka about to retort was hastily interrupted as Sasuke intervened. What would you do if your whole clan had been massacred and placed the blame on your older sibling? Sasuke said with a bored tone. He had to admit it was strange to watch the boy squirm as he tried to answer their questions. Sasuke. Kakashi bellowed at the young raven. The boy was revealing some pretty high-class secrets. What does he mean, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura asked, not understanding the underlying message of the Uchiha's words. The fact that she did proved Sasuke's point. Konoha were clueless to the truth. He's saying that the Uchiha massacre was an inside job and that Itachi Uchiha is innocent. Could this day get any more troublesome? Shikamaru explained as he rubbed his head. This mission had been far too strenuous for him. Of course he'd say that. He's a traitor just like Kiba. Kakashi yelled, spinning round with murderous intent that made the boy fear for his life. Just like who? Sasuke spoke with a fierce amount of venom on the words. He surprised even himself on how defensive he was about his older brother. The silver-haired Jounin was glaring at the Inuzuka, daring him to answer. Sasuke was close to the edge, and the scarecrow had no idea what had happened should he be provoked. I said. Like who? Sasuke stated impatiently. His Sharingan flared to life, staring daggers straight through the dog boy in front of him. The fully matured Sharingan, Kakashi thought, shocked by the revealing of Sasuke's 3 tomos in each eye. He hadn't even expected the boy to have unlocked the bloodline yet. At his age, this kid really is a prodigy. He thought to himself. He wondered how Sasuke and Naruto would compare to his genin in a strange train of thoughts, but those boys hadn't even been trained in the ninja arts as far as he knew. Naruto. What is it that you know, exactly? What I mean is all of it. Naruto cut off the silver-haired man. Kakashi felt sweat drop down his face. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. This day had gotten a lot worse since these two had shown up. All of what? Sakura asked quietly, feeling completely out of the loop. The talk of all these village secrets was really confusing her. Naruto simply blinked and his eyes revealed themselves, the henge he had placed on them, dispelling, revealing them to be blood red, his pupils becoming dark slits. He gazed at the silver-haired Jounin with a calm look on his face, but it seems that simply revealing his eyes was enough to unease the man. Naruto, relax, we're just talking. Think of the people around, Kakashi persuaded. The thought of the fox being unleashed in the area and leaving total devastation for miles around wasn't one that Kakashi liked. This is what my eyes normally look like, and don't even consider that I'm not in control right now. Control of what? Why isn't anyone answering me? Sakura shouted angrily in a huff of rage. The 9-tailed fox, I am its container after all. Naruto spoke calmly. Sasuke was silent as he looked over at the 4 in front of him as they tried to take in all this new information. Sakura paled. She, like all of Konoha, knew all about the destruction that the 9-tailed fox had caused. To think that Naruto was in control of it made her instantly regret all of those times she had not so playfully hit him over the head. What are your motives? Kakashi asked, getting straight to the point. What are yours? Sasuke replied almost instantly. To defend the bridge builder Tazuna until construction is completed. Shikamaru intervened, hoping to use their mission as some sort of bargaining chip to get the enemy to reveal their plans in return. We need him for part of our own plans. But we have no intentions of harming him. When we're finished with him, he is more than welcome to finish the bridge. Sasuke offered. The easier they walked away with Tazuna the better. Kakashi was not someone they were sure about. He was a captain of the Anbu at one point and they knew better than to recklessly attack such a man. Like, we'd just let you have him. Kiba said as he could take no more. He raced towards the two, jumping and spinning his body, forming his signature jutsu. Gitsuga. His body span rapidly as he formed his hurricane-like attack. Kakashi realized a moment too late that this meant war. Naruto took in a breath of air, making his lungs expand as Sasuke did the same besides him. Futen. Raging cyclone. Naruto fired first as a harsh breath of wind collided with the boy, stopping him from advancing and making the other people present cover their face with their arms. Haten. Sacred Dragon Fire. Sasuke spoke, complimenting Naruto's attack with one of his own. Kiba. Kakashi suddenly whipped through hand seals as the wind started to ignite as a terrifying stream of fire spewed in a constant flow from the raven's mouth. Suiton. Water bullet. Kakashi's hastily prepared technique was fired from his mouth as 3 large bullets of water struck back against the now colossal-sized fire technique. Shikamaru had managed to grab Kiba's shadow and using it, he pulled the boy out of the way of the blast, using the precious seconds that the water bullets had bought him. Out of harm's way, the 4-leaf ninja looked on as the fire attack continued off into the distance, leaving the surface of the bridge scorched black. Kiba, stay with Sakura. Shikamaru, support if you see an opportunity. With that, Shikamaru crouched into his position ready to strike with his shadow possession technique. But sensei. Kiba whined, his team was underestimating him yet again, he couldn't take it. Do as I say, Kiba. Kakashi spoke in a tone that revealed he was far beyond angry. Kakashi looked back at the boys before sitting in a defensive stance, covering the hindrance of a wound that was inflicted upon his chest. As soon as he did, icicles struck close to his feet as a warning. Your fight is with me. Haku said, tears welled up in her eyes, but she managed to control herself. Kakashi growled. Fighting the three of them might be difficult while defending his team and the bridge builder. He wasn't comfortable about leaving his genin to fight those two either. Even if they lacked training, he didn't believe they got by without learning to fight. Not giving him the choice, however, another flurry of icicles caused him to leap backwards, though as he landed he regretted moving at all, as Haku finished creating her signature jutsu. Even if she couldn't outright defeat him, she could buy time until the other two had finished off the genin. With those two, she felt they might have a chance of taking out the man. Hyoten. Demonic ice mirrors. As soon as she named her technique, water from the air formed large pillars that surrounded Kakashi, and as soon as they did, they began to freeze, creating a dome of ice mirrors. Once fully formed, Haku stepped inside of one, melting into it as she became a reflection that was displayed on every other mirror in the dome. Kakashi scanned the area he was now sealed in. He doubted he'd be able to just slide back out again. As if answering his question, senbon made of pure ice came at him from behind, three of them aiming for his neck. He easily beat them away with his kunai, but another wave came from behind him once again as Haku traveled from mirror to mirror. Kakashi had to admit the technique was keeping him on his toes, and he had to think of a way out, and soon before he was worn down. Although the attacks were easily countered at first, they soon sped up with more senbon being shot each time that Haku struck, making it increasingly difficult to counter, never mind think of a strategy with the constant pressure. Still, Kakashi wasn't someone who'd go down so easy. He knew that the girl wasn't trying to defeat him, she knew better than that. If anything, she was just keeping him occupied. Hiba and the rest of the genin looked towards the two who looked as calm as day. Despite what just happened, they looked totally unfazed, not to mention the scene with Haku and Zabuza, they seemed uncaring. It was weird to the three, though they were ninjas, the two before them seemed far more qualified for the job somehow. Sasuke raised his foot, the genin immediately jumped onto the defensive, watching as the foot that was slowly rising captured their attention. Then within a blink he was gone. He appeared directly in front of Sakura. His slight height advantage made him look all the more intimidating to the cherry blossom, as she thought that she was about to die. Sakura. Kiba shouted as he turned to make a move towards the pink-haired girl at the back of the pack, defending the bridge builder by herself. However, Sasuke didn't strike. Sakura. Will you hand him over? We don't plan to harm you or your friends. He said calmly. She struggled with herself inwardly, as this was the nicest that Sasuke had ever spoken to her. Dispersing the stars in her eyes, she answered with a silent shake of her head. Izuna-sen, is it? Sasuke spoke over the girl, no longer interested in her. The bridge builder looked to the young raven after being spoken to. He was scared, but straightened up slightly to talk back to the one speaking to him. What is it? He replied in a gruff voice, though tried to remain calm. Come with us. There'll be no need for these Konoha ninja to defend you. If I wouldn't recommend that Shikamaru. He warned, his eyes facing the man in front of him as the shadow was about to touch the heels of his shoes. Shikamaru's eyes widened in shock as his shadow stopped in place at the warning. Akamaru snarled at the Uchiha, running up to him. He yapped in a brave act of defiance to the raven's actions, but to everyone's surprise, except for the blonde who seemed to expect it, Sasuke simply crouched down. Sasuke looked down at the small puppy and smiled happily. Akamaru snarled in confusion, slightly fearing what was going to happen next. Get away from Akamaru. Kiba yelled desperately, though didn't make any sudden moves. Even with his speed, if he was too hostile, his partner could easily be killed by the raven. What is he doing? Sakura asked, confused. It seemed like the boy was genuinely happy to see the dog for some reason. She felt her mouth fall slightly ajar as she witnessed what happened next. Relax, I'm not going to hurt you, Sasuke said softly, which was accompanied by a happy chuckle. He slowly raised his hand over Akamaru, making sure that the dog could see it, then seeing that the dog hadn't bitten him in refusal, he began stroking the small puppy who seemingly had warmed up to the Uchiha. Akamaru began barking happily, leaving the raven to continue chuckling. The Team 7 genin couldn't believe their eyes at the scene, what had just unfolded. Akamaru, what are you doing? He's the enemy. Northeast Mai. Kiba roared, somewhat embarrassed by his partner's actions. How could you just make friends with him like that? He bellowed, refusing to believe what had just happened. It didn't make any sense. Then Akamaru turned to look at the three genin that he was aligned with. What have you done to him? Kiba shouted desperately. Cold sweat poured down his face as he saw the mark upon his dog's forehead. It looked just like a Sharingan with 3 tomos. The Uchiha gave the boy a hard gaze while standing once more. There's no need to involve an animal in your stupidity. Sasuke answered coldly. With that, Akamaru staggered over to his owner, laid down against his shoe, and seemingly fell asleep, causing the mark to fade away. Like I was saying. Come with us if you want to save the wave country. Sasuke said looking at Tazuna sternly before turning on heel, walking back towards Naruto as if the event hadn't happened. The blonde ran a hand through his unruly hair before letting out a sigh. He had hoped that would have secured the deal. What do you mean save wave country? Kiba shouted and soon he got his response of Naruto, God, you really are an idiot. Who even said we were the bad guys? He slapped the palm of his hand against his head in sheer disappointment. Me an idiot, you should hear yourself. Of course a traitor is the bad guy. He snarled in response, refusing to listen to the blonde's reasoning. You keep calling us traitors, but we're not even registered ninja. You're obviously an idiot. Naruto said looking at the Inyazuka with disbelief. What did you say? He said as he clenched his fists in fury, he couldn't help but get mad. Idiot, Naruto said the word in a stretched out way that made it even more infuriating to Kiba. Kiba, they're obviously toying with you, Shikamaru informed as he sighed, somewhat disappointed in his teammates' antics. What do you want of me? Tazuna said, surprising the four genin who looked towards the man with disbelief. Even Kakashi, who was currently fending of Senbon, took the time to listen in. We simply want you alive. Sasuke spoke with authority seeing as the man seemed to be questioning his motives. Straight to the point but still elusive. What for? The man courageously asked the raven standing before him. To save the wave country. Naruto said with finality. The old man wasn't willing to ask more after the tone of voice the blonde used. Save wave? Yeah right, there's no way traitors would want to save anything. Kiba said before following up his bark with bite, charging towards the Uchiha with speed, his fist cocked, he grabbed Sasuke's black high-collared jacket, dragging him upwards, as the raven put up no resistance, his fist launched towards the face of his enemy, in what he expected would be a nasty blow. He hit Sasuke with everything he had, he felt the collision of his fist meeting the raven's nose, but like a cruel dream, his target faded away like it was never there in the first place, and before he had any chance of reacting, Kiba felt a presence behind him, he turned a moment too late, as Sasuke finished his hand seals. Annoying. Raiden. Precision cannon. Two of the Uchiha's fingers prodded Kiba's right shoulder, the Inyazuka was confused and frightened, his eyes widened as he heard the deafening cry of lightning and a wave of pain hit, a blue beam shot from the raven's outstretched fingers, blasting a hole through the boy's shoulder. The light traveled on into the horizon before fading away. Kiba. Shikamaru cried out desperately as he saw the wound the Uchiha caused, the boy looked incredibly pale. Blood flown down from the wound, staining the dog boy's shirt a dark crimson, but the raven wasn't finished. He gripped the boy's uninjured arm and used it to swing the boy towards his teammates. He'll be fine. Probably. Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head. Not everyone had Kyuubi to take care of their wounds. Blood seeped from the hole in Kiba's shoulder and the other genin looked about ready to pass out. Shit, what's going on out there? Kakashi thought as he beat down a barrage of 40 senbon. He had tried numerous jutsu to get out of the ice mirrors, none of them seemed to be effective against the ice jutsu, and using a thrust attack like his Chidori might leave him looking like a hedgehog. He grunted in annoyance. He dealt with another wave of senbon from the unrelenting girl. Fine, look at him, he doesn't look like he'll be fine, Naruto. Sakura said as if she was telling off like when they were young, but to her surprise the blonde didn't look impressed. Then do something about it. Naruto stated coldly, he didn't like being reminded of his life in Konoha, and this was no exception. The girl frowned viciously before she decided to call his bluff. HMPH. Sasuke is the one doing all the work, all you've done is use those lame wind moves. She said, folding her arms to make her point. For all she knew, Naruto was the same as he had always been. Gyuden. Beheading crescent blade. With a simple chop of his arm, a crescent moon of wind chakra raced by the girl's body with tremendous force. She gasped as the strength of the attack, the sheer power behind the gale, sucked away her breath as it sailed by her, causing her to cough in a desperate attempt to regain oxygen. Next time I won't miss. Naruto said calmly, earning a look from Sasuke, but he said nothing. So, you fresh out of the academy or something? You really shouldn't be out here, it's dangerous, you know. The blonde chuckled happily, moving on from the previous matter. The Uchiha walked back over to the blonde, turned and looked back at his opponents, though he was growing tired of putting on a performance. Yeah, that's right, what has that got to do with anything, Naruto? Shikamaru said, still wondering the motives of the boy. With the changes in attitude it was hard to pick up any incentives to their actions. It seems like you're stalling. He analyzed. Naruto gave a subtle look to the Uchiha who returned the glance before letting out a heavy sigh, deciding to come clean to his audience. He's right, Naruto, they're not cooperating. It'll be fine as long as we don't kill them, right? As he said this, however, Kakashi jumped free from his ice prison, straight into the open, the ice quickly fading away, leaving a calm-looking Haku standing on the bridge. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura shouted enthusiastically. Once again she was Auditor Jounin-sensei's strength as he managed to escape the icy prison. Sasuke. Naruto said. The Uchiha nodded. In a flash he was by Haku's side, ready to oppose the Leaf Jounin. So this is how it's going to be, Sasuke. Kakashi said as he fell into a defensive stance again, not sure of the boy's strength. If the hole in Kiba's shoulder and the speed the young raven displayed was anything to go by, he had to be at least cautious. I'm smarter than to fight a jounin by choice. Sasuke replied with a bored expression. So what are you going to do then? Kakashi asked, somewhat on the alert. I said by choice. Sasuke answered quickly. So you're being forced? The jounin interrogated. In a way. Things could have gone better. Sasuke brushed off the questions with elusive answers. Interesting. But I doubt that your plans would be of any worth anyway. Kakashi taunted. Perhaps not, but I'm sure the people of Wave will enjoy them. Sasuke responded, his cocky attitude almost gaining a rise from the scarecrow jounin. What do you plan to do with to the country of Wave? Kakashi said in a deadly serious tone. He wanted answers and was irritated when the ice user cut him off. That's enough talk Kakashi, Sasuke-kun. Haku said before violently raising her arm to throw her senbon once more, but to her surprise Sasuke's arm caught her wrist gently. Sasuke-kun. What is it? She asked. Sasuke turned to the silver-haired jounin ignoring her. Let me see how well you use that eye. Sasuke said with a smirk. Suddenly the two of them were sucked into a battle of genjutsu. So, 2-on-1. Naruto said rolling his shoulder blades confident in his abilities as he looked across at the team that planned to face him. He wasn't sure of their strength, but he knew that they weren't experienced enough to be fighting out here. 3. I can still fight. Kiba said gritting his teeth through trying to ignore the pain of the now bandaged arm, though he didn't understand what Naruto was getting at. So, 2-on-1. Naruto repeated glancing at Sakura then back to Kiba. I'm a ninja to Naruto. She said with bravery. His last attack had silenced her, and she believed him when he said he wouldn't miss the next time he attacked. She had to admit, she was frightened. Someone needs to protect the old man. Naruto replied paying her no mind. Then Kiba should be the one to do it. She declared angrily, causing Naruto to sigh in disbelief. I'm not on your team Sakura. There's no point in telling me your plans. He said getting somewhat annoyed by the girl. Kiba. You stay with Tazuna, you're hurt. She said trying to be gentle with him. She knew how stubborn he could be, but of course the dog boy was far from cooperative with the cherry blossom. I said I can still fight. Kiba yelled to his audience, snarling in an attempt to back up his words. More importantly, why do you want Tazuna to be protected Naruto? Shikamaru stepped in, hoping to stop the childish arguments that were seriously making them look bad. We already told you we want the old geezer. I don't know why you won't just hand him over. Seriously, you're idiots if you think that the only people Gato will send are those two. Naruto answered, mocking the group of fresh genin in front of him. Who else will he send? Shikamaru questioned, his eyebrow raised in mild interest. Well, he sent us. Naruto replied casually, expecting a rise from the shadow user. So you admit you want to kill him? Kiba butted in amongst the calm conversation. Don't think so lowly of us. After seeing Wave like this you think we'd kill their hopes? We ran away from Konoha because of the way we were treated, not because we felt like being criminals. Naruto said frowning all the while. He just couldn't understand why this person clung to the idea of them being traitors. They had done nothing against Konoha. Then why do you need him? Explain it to us, perhaps we can cooperate. Shikamaru offered. He's simply a bargaining chip. If we can get even half of that man's wealth for Tazuna's life, then Wave's economy will improve leaps and bounds. Naruto responded before sighing. He was getting nowhere at this rate. Fight me or hand him over. We don't have time for this. He proposed. These were fresh out from academy. He wasn't sure how he felt about injuring them. This proposition was the least he could do. It looks like you gotta fight. Kiba replied with a confident grin. He glared at and became serious as the blonde who fell into a defensive stance. The blonde taunted. Kiba was instantly down on all fours in his feral fighting stance as he began his charge across the large bridge. Sakura could only watch on from her position by Tazuna as the battle was about to commence. Time and time again Naruto easily parried his blows, much to the irritation of the Inyazuka. Shikamaru flanked as the two danced in their competition of taijutsu. Kiba aggressively roared, hoping to land a hit, while Naruto looked to be enjoying himself. The shadow user rolled smoke bombs towards the blonde as Kiba leapt backwards. Now Kiba. He called out as the thick smoke rose around the blonde. Seeing his opportunity, the dog boy began to spin his body. Gitsuga. The hurricane attack was heading straight for the thick smoke, but to the boy's surprise a vicious gust of wind cleaned the boy's vision, and he easily evaded the attack by centimeters, seeing the Inyazuka sail right by him. Gyuden. Great breakthrough. Naruto bellowed. In an instant a gust of wind erupted from Naruto's palm as Kiba's fang over fang passed by him. Suddenly the boy was hit by it, the force cancelling his technique as he was violently hurled towards the floor of the bridge. He bounced against the cold metal before sliding. To the despair of his teammate he continued to slide dangerously close to the edge of the bridge. Kiba. Shikamaru shouted, but before he could help his fallen teammate, he felt the breath in his body instantly leave him as he heard his own ribs shatter due to the force of Naruto's punch. I didn't even see it. He thought as he was bent over the blonde's arm, which was currently the only thing supporting his body, but with a cruel knee to the chin, Shikamaru was left falling through the air before landing painfully on his back. He looked up at the blonde before forcing his body to move, rolling backwards and into a standing position. He readied himself for an attack that didn't come. To his surprise, Naruto fell into a defensive again. Naruto had to admit, Kiba was sturdier than he looked. He roared with pain just to stand again. The blood that trickled from his lip was crudely wiped away before he threatened the blonde. "You just wait until Kakashi-sensei is finished with your friend," he said while letting out a beaten chuckle. "The two of you don't stand a chance against him, and you know how long has he been using the Sharingan?" Naruto interrupted and suddenly Kiba faltered. His eyes widened as he thought of the time Kakashi collapsed after fighting Zabuza, leaving him growling quietly in defiance. That doesn't make up for his skill. Who knows how quickly he could finish you two off? Who knows if he could finish us three off? Naruto corrected, reminding the boy that Haku was still around. She was also another person who had ruthlessly kicked him around, although he had to admit, fighting her instead of the blonde would feel merciful right now. Hit, the shadow. Kyuubi reminded as the technique slithered towards Naruto. Shadow clone jutsu. Naruto said calmly, he merely pushed the clone into the shadow, the technique ensnaring the clone instead of the original, effectively making Shikamaru's technique useless for the time being. Shikamaru growled as his attempt was stopped, the clone dispelled, and the shadow crawled back to its owner, showing that the jutsu had been cancelled. Besides Kiba, he's outnumbered. Naruto said logically, shrugging his arms while speaking. HMPH, it's only 2-on-1 at the moment, Kakashi-sensei is no pushover. Kiba said stubbornly, trying to get the blonde to step down, but he hadn't quite understood what the blonde meant. You're right, it is 2-on-1, plus Sasuke is in a chair. The blonde agreed with the dog-like boy for once. So you meant his eyes after all. Shikamaru thought aloud as the three turned to look towards the Jounin and the Uchiha. A motionless battle was taking place in a world of Genjutsu as the two of them stood perfectly still, glaring at one another. Each of them had seen themselves die over and over. It was hard to tell what was fake and what was real as the two fought to the death, although they fought over and over with different outcomes. Each time the world around them was so real that it took a huge amount of effort just to remember it was fake. No, inside this Genjutsu world it was all real as Sasuke entered another Taijutsu fight with the Jounin. Normally he was sure he would be outmatched by the silver-haired man, but in this world the two traded blows like destined rivals, the other desperately fending off killing blows that had already killed them numerous times. However, every time the other seemed to die, the world warped and reset with a mild strain on the mind of the loser of the round. About to start another round, Sasuke stopped within the illusion, countering Kakashi's blow before leaping backwards, the world around them mirroring that of reality. They were stood on the uncompleted bridge, every detail of the imaginary world was perfect and unbelievably convincing. "What's the matter, Sasuke, don't tell me you're tired already?" Kakashi taunted. The Uchiha just brushed off the comment, not interested in giving the man the benefit of an answer. "It should be about time," he answered calmly before the Genjutsu around them folded in on itself and reality revealed itself. "Time for what?" Kakashi asked in a tone that meant business. He was tired of all this mystery. "He's here," Naruto answered as he walked over to the Jounin. Behind him were two rather messed up genin, bruised all over, but didn't look like they were in any danger. As for Sakura, she remained unscathed. Well. I should have known someone as useless as that Zabuza could never get the job done. If you want something doing, do it yourself. Isn't that right, young Naruto? Gato said before laughing enough for his whole audience. His mercenaries with him, the man was ready to rule wave. "How dare you?" Haku stated with rage, sadness flown through her voice, her fists clenched in anger before Naruto took over, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I couldn't agree more, Gato. I want a job doing, and I'm going to do it myself." With that he readied himself to take on the large group of mercenaries with his signature technique. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Naruto spoke before 5 clones popped into existence. They charged blindly at the crowd of mercenaries who drawn their various weapons, all of them rushing to outnumber the clones, but as soon the clones neared them, Naruto smirked. With a huge flare of chakra he activated the true purpose of the clones. "Great clone explosion," he said in a bored tone, and in seconds the human-shaped bombs activated, decimating Gato's forces in mere seconds. The genin looked away in horror of the scene in front of them. The bridge was fast becoming a graveyard. Gato wriggled in Sasuke's vice-like grip, urgently trying to break free as his life depended on it. "Wait. Please. Don't, I'll give you anything, you can rule this country. Imagine it, you could be the Super UG." The man couldn't finish as Sasuke's lightning chakra slashed open his throat. He dropped the man that hit the unforgiving bridge. "Hizuna. This man's hideout isn't far from here, head southeast and you'll find a large warehouse. This seemed like all of his forces, but you should take the Leaf Ninja with you. They are defending you after all. Sasuke stated, and with that he jumped overboard, much to the surprise of the occupants of the bridge. Haku, come with us. Naruto said, slugging the lifeless Abusa over his shoulder. What do you intend to do with him? She asked defensively. Give him a proper burial, that's all. Naruto said, smiling in an attempt to ease the girl a little. She nodded her head in understanding before grabbing his sword. Allow me. Naruto said, drawing a complex seal on the girl's wrist in black ink. She was confused, but when the sword was suddenly sealed within it, she was thankful. So where are we heading? She asked with a smile, but without an answer, Naruto just followed in Sasuke's footsteps, jumping of the bridge only for Haku to follow suit. It's payday. Naruto grinned as the three ran across the water. Sasuke couldn't help but smirk. On the bridge Kakashi wondered what would happen to the three of them. Of course this meeting would have to be mentioned to the Hokage. Even if the boys seemed to be only putting on a performance, they did harm his team. Not without warning though. He considered thinking of the many times offered them a simple deal. Well, at least I have something to think about on the way home. He thought with a sigh.